Mic's on. Mic's on. Good morning. Good morning. Please find a seat. Thank you very much. Welcome to the Coos County Board of Commissioners work session on election integrity with Dr. Douglas Frank and Mr. Justin Grimmer, having a discussion. Before we start with the pledge, I wanted to lay down some ground rules. The first one is, if you have one of these, it has a button or a switch on it. I'd like you to take it out right now if it's not silenced, and silence it. If your phone goes off and I hear it during this meeting, you will be invited to leave. The second thing I want to tell you is that there will be no groans, moans, sounds of disgust or approval, none of that. There will be no comments from the gallery today. If there's anybody who doesn't understand what I just said, then I'm sorry, but we need to maintain the decorum and the productivity and respect in this room. Everybody will be respected. I'm going to go ahead and lay down a couple other, I'm going to lay down what the format is going to be, and then we'll proceed with the pledge. We're going to start with 30 minutes that Dr. Frank is going to have to make a presentation. That will be followed by 30 minutes in which Mr. Grimmer will be able to counter-present. Dr. Frank and Mr. Grimmer will then each have 5 minutes, and then a second 5 minutes. At the end of that, the commissioners will ask any questions that we have, and then following that, we'll open the floor to public questions. Public questions will be limited to 1 minute to ask the question. You can stay at the podium during your answer. Of course, questioners will be invited to come up to the podium, introduce yourself, and you can remain there while your question is being answered. If there's a follow-up that you have based on the answer, you will have 30 seconds to ask that question, and that will be the end of it then, and we'll move on. The questioners, I'm going to make sure that we're balanced and we alternate. We're not going to have 10 questions from one side and none from the other. We're going to go right, left, right, left, right, left. Okay? So, I'll try to discern that determination and make sure that we're getting questions coming from the same direction. And if you have a question that applies to both parties, then that's of course fine as well. One last thing I'll mention is that during the main presentations, the commissioners reserve the right to ask a quick interjection question, and we will keep that very limited for the benefit of all. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. All right, without further ado, I invite Dr. Frank and Mr. Grimmer to step to the front table. I think it's a doctor. Mr. Grimmer, are you a PhD?
I am.
My apologies, Dr. Grimmer. I didn't mean to slight you in the least.
Don't feel slighted at all.
Okay, very good, very good. All right, so Dr. Frank, welcome.
Thank you.
The county council is going to be keeping time on everything.
Sure.
And so without further ado, please begin.
Good to be with you guys again. I was here in July 2nd. We had some technical problems that day. So my slides, the people in the audience couldn't see them. But what I did, and I'll just show you a picture of that, is just yesterday in the room, hotel room, I took the recording. How come it's not changing on the screen? There we go. I took the recording and put it on YouTube. I guess in here, once again, the people in the room aren't going to be able to see the whole screen, I guess, but the people online can. And I created a video of that, 20 minutes long, where on YouTube. So, and I inserted my slides during the talk. So it makes it easy for people to watch. So anybody who missed that earlier one can now see it. So I did that for you guys, and I'm glad today that the people in the audience are going to be able to see it.
And where is that available?
On YouTube, and if you go to Douglas Frank
Okay.
YouTube channel, it'll be there,
Very good.
and you'll be able to see the original recording was put there by Rob Taylor on the Rob Taylor Report website. It's just that one doesn't have the slides in it, so I downloaded that, added in my slides, and then posted that so people can see that on my channel.
Very good.
I'm a scientist, and I always have to tell people, I didn't.
Excuse me, can you reshare your screen again? I'm sorry.
Okay, let's see here. I'm gonna go ahead and cancel this.
Counselor, when this happens, when a tech difficulty, just pause, please.
Reshare my screen. Okay, let's see here.
Let me make you the presenter.
Okay, I'm sharing my entire screen.
Okay, it's coming back. And there probably is a little bit of a delay since you're going out and coming back in.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. Okay.
Okay, there it is. Okay, I'll kind of resume from that point then. See how this works. Yeah, there's a delay. Yeah, so the people in here won't be able to see the whole screen, I guess.
Right, because your
There's
format size is different than hers.
Yes. So I'll do my best for you folks to describe what you can't see. Anyway, I'm a scientist. I have a PhD in surface electroanalytical chemistry. I've been did that most of my career for 40 years. I have 60 scientific peer-reviewed publications. In 1990, I was nominated for a Nobel Prize in Chemistry for one of my discoveries. It made the cover of Science Magazine, which is the leading journal in America in science, and Naturwissenschaften, which is the leading journal in Europe for that. Also had cover articles in Nature that people know about. So in other words, it was a big deal. And the good thing about that is I got to leave academics because I didn't have much use for them by 1996. I went into business for myself. I've done consulting for businesses all over the country since. And so that's kind of my history a little bit. I didn't choose to be in elections. In fact, I was expecting to be out in my lab. I have a beautiful physics lab out in the country, out in Ohio, where I live now. And that's where I'd be right now doing physics experiments, except guess what I've been doing for the last 4 years? I've been traveling the country. They call me the Johnny Appleseed of election integrity. I do this for no fee. I don't charge anybody for my work. People chip in and help pay for my plane tickets, but I don't charge anything. A lot of times I pay for everything. So that's the way it is. I've spoken now to over 100,000 people in person, over 650 formal presentations. So I've been pretty busy. 25 out of 30 days a month I'm on the road talking to people. They call me the Johnny Appleseed of election integrity. Because the LA Times did a hit piece on me last year. It was a pretty cool, actually it wasn't too bad as far as hit pieces go. So they were noted that I had at that point, a year ago, given over 50 speeches in the state of California. I'm over 100 now. A lot of good stuff happening in California. For example, Huntington Beach just announced that 400,000 voters that they were going to start running their own elections starting in 2026, requiring photo ID and signature and local run, and they added 120 local precincts. It's a good thing, and you've heard about Shasta County, a lot of effort with that. So, but I have to admit that it's an ongoing war. It's not settled. Things are not settled. I originally got started in this because I was invited by the Pennsylvania State Legislature to examine their elections. And you might recall, Doug Mastriano asked for a review of the 2020 election. Well, I was part of the team of 6 that was brought in to do the audit in the state of Pennsylvania, and we found so much stuff. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. And so that was sort of the beginning of my journey in election integrity, even though for decades, I've been modeling elections and teaching students how to do that, and teaching them, using elections as a model to teach them how to do statistics and what polling is and all the statistics around that. Well, anyway, Mr. Blundell discovered my work and made a movie about me called Scientific Proof. Suddenly 10 million people knew who I was in early 2021, and so that's just been my life ever since. So I have a lot of experience. I've met with about 24 secretaries of states with them in their office with a white hat hacker, and hacked into their elections right in front of their faces. And so while a lot of people think that their elections are secure, no, in every brand, every state, they are not secure. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. People also figured out who I was because President Trump asked me to be his keynote speaker at his first rally after being out of office. It was in June of 2021, and he said to me, "Dr. Frank, explain to the world how my elections are being stolen." So I'm not a stranger to this. I've been doing this every day essentially for 4 years now, and I'm very familiar with Oregon data, as you'll see. I like what Patrick Byrne describes me. He says, "Dr. Frank reverse engineered the algorithms they're using to cheat our elections." And that's exactly the best description I've heard of me yet. But he also said in a recent talk, he says there are a dozen tools in their cheating toolbox, and they use whichever combination of tools works best in each situation. And I think those two quotes really capture a lot of what my work is. Bottom line is, and I'm just going to tell you guys, the bottom line problem that you have, and especially in Oregon, is that you're not in charge of your own elections. And I'll just quote Stalin at this point. It's enough that the people, Stalin said, it is enough that the people know there was an election. The people who cast the votes decide nothing. The people who count the votes decide everything. And I have a modern version of that, which is whoever touches the machines last wins. So, in other words, the problem is you're not the one in control of your elections, someone else is, and I can prove that to you. Now, I'm not going to do this in today's presentation, but I wanted you to know that this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing in Coos County. In fact, I met with the team yesterday. As I'm going around the country building teams that are learning how to, that I'm passing along the wisdom that I've learned from around the country, how to take back control of their elections. I call it the 7 steps, and there is a 7 steps team now established in your county, and they are working towards this. So you'll be hearing more about this from them. It's important to me that you realize that it's not me doing it, it's your citizens doing it. I'm just coaching them. So it's really a local movement that I'm coaching through on this. Now let's just talk about the state of Oregon. And this first graph is a very illustrative graph. Oops, sorry. I'm going to get my electronic pointer going here so that the people at home can see too. So what this graph shows is from 1960 to present. The top blue curve is how many people are 18 and older in the state of Oregon. And so you notice in 1960, you had around 1.25 million people of voting age, and now you're up to around 3 million people of voting age. So you can see this graph just kind of steadily climbing. And then this second curve down, this black curve, shows you how many people are registered in each of your elections. So it's every 2 years. It shows you, and these data are right from the Secretary of State website, so I'm not inventing any of this. It's just downloading and showing it. And you'll notice that for the most part, it tracks pretty well. There's some bumps and wiggles. But right here, starting in 2014, you'll notice that the voter rolls suddenly really surge quickly to where you've essentially got everybody registered in your state. And that's because you have all these automatic systems for registering. In fact, I was just reading the newspaper article this morning. Your Secretary of State has put a pause in your state on the automatic registration of people through their DMV. Why did they do that? Because you're putting a whole bunch of people in the rolls that don't belong there. Okay, it's a huge error, and your Secretary of State has acknowledged this. Well, this is a symptom of that. This graph shows that exact process happening. Then the bottom curve, the red curve, is your every 2 years how many people turned out in every election. And I like pointing out to notice that if there hadn't been this huge surge in your registration, if it just kind of continued along the same trend, you'd essentially have 100% turnout in your 2020 election. Okay, and that's very suspicious. In other words, you suddenly became patriotic or something like that. And even your midterms now are ridiculously overturned out. So that is suspicious. Now, all I'm doing is showing you data here. I'm not making any wild claims. There's the data themselves show you have an issue with your registration rolls, and lo and behold, little did I know, here's an article from this morning where your own Secretary of State acknowledges, yep, you have a problem.
And the governor.
And yeah, exactly. So it ain't me necessarily. Your own data show that, and so do your own leaders in your own state. Now, if you just do a very simple comparison where you compare the trend in your population to the trend in your voter rolls, it shows that you have about 640,000 too many people in your voter rolls. Okay, it exceeds the population trend. That's a huge number. That's like a 1 in 4, 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 of the people in your voter rolls are not real voters. They don't belong in your rolls. Now, let's just keep it easy. Let's just say it's about 30%. Well, that means that 70% of the people in your rolls are likely to be real voters, and that you should give them a ballot and they should vote. And the other 30% don't belong there. Well, so what's the problem with that? Well, as long as if you had in-person elections and people showed up and voted, well, there's probably no problem at all with that, because people would show their ID and they'd be real voters, and you give them a ballot and they vote. But in Oregon, you have a problem. You mail ballots to all these people, okay? And so you're basically littering the sidewalks with ballots that are to people that are not real voters. So anybody who wants to cheat the election has got a ready reserve of ballots that they can scrape up. And you know, when you're talking about 640,000 in your state that are just basically floating around on the pavement, that's a pretty serious issue. So that's the problem. Now, you're not exempt here in Coos, and I'll just show the same kind of graph for Coos County, 1980 to present, across the bottom. Good, people here can see it. Notice that the blue curve is the population, and basically you're unchanged now for over that period. Last 40 years, your population's pretty steady. Okay, that would your little bumps and wiggles, but basically it's flat. So, and then here's your voter rolls. From the black curve is the voter rolls, and you notice it just tracks pretty much regularly. In fact, election experts will tell you that a clean voter rolls typically has about 70% of the population in it, the voting age population, and there you are, right about there. So I would guess, I mean, just back of the envelope calculation, I would say your voter rolls were great in Coos County until 2014. Then something happened, and notice how they've just suddenly begun surging, just like the rest of the state. Now, why is this important? It's important for me to point this out because this is not your local clerk doing this. This is in every county in the state, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now, the black curve shows who's registered to vote. The gray curve that I've got, you can see, is month by month, because I've downloaded the data from your Secretary of State for every month in Coos County over that period of time. And you can see that it wasn't even a steady climb. It's a sudden injection of a lot of voters into your voter rolls in your county right before the 2016 election. And you can see it just kind of climbing up gradually there, but there's more to that. I'll come back to that. Now we can compare. I went online just yesterday and looked it up to see where you are today, and that's my little dot that I just posted. So you're right on track for crossing your population. And I want you to know there are 8 states in the country and 350 counties in that situation where they have more people in the voter rolls than they have people. So Judicial Watch has been going around suing county after county, state after state, and they win every one of those lawsuits. And you're next. I understand that the Judicial Watch is about to sue your state for this exact reason. So it's not just me saying that your voter rolls are a wreck. It's your governor and it's Judicial Watch, and they win these lawsuits every day. So you get the point I'm making. You also have the same issue with your voter rolls and your turnout. You notice you have this ridiculously high turnout in 2020, and if your voter rolls had just been kind of continuing along the same trend, you'd have more than 100% turnout in your elections. So the first point is your rolls are growing faster than your population, and the second point, and I can do the same calculation, your voter rolls in Coos County have 47% more people in your rolls than you would expect based upon your trend. That is a huge issue. It's 16,000 people probably don't belong in your rolls. And if we just compare the trend, you notice if you just follow the trend of your registrations, you'd have more than 100% turnout in 2020, for example. So that's a serious issue. It questions the integrity of your elections. Now what I did is I downloaded for every county in Oregon, all 36 counties, how many people were in your voter rolls according to the Secretary of State for every election since 1980. So I'm just showing you the number of people in the voter rolls. Now the nice thing about a graph like this is you can see the raw data. The bad thing about a graph like this is you can't see the small counties, you can only see the big ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to normalize it, it's called. I'm going to put them all on a percent scale so you can see the shape of every county, and that's what this graph shows you. And what you'll notice is that that the counties back in the 80s and 90s, the voter rolls were basically random. But starting around 2002, they started to sync up. By the way, that's Help America Vote Act, so that's where there's a federal intervention. And then look at 2014, basically all of the counties in Oregon, every one of them started surging in the voter rolls. So that's clearly not every individual clerk in every individual county suddenly going, well, I'm going to start registering people. This is a state issue. It's the state putting people in your rolls, not your local clerk putting people in your rolls. If it were, they'd all behave differently. No, they're all behaving exactly the same, and at the same rates even. It's shocking to see that. So in other words, I want to make this absolutely clear today. I have nothing against your local clerk. He's not the problem.
She.
Oh, pardon me. I thought the guy was the clerk. So my apologies. So I have nothing against her. She's probably just using the state system like all the other clerks are. The problem is the state system. And that's why the governor, for example, today is saying, whoa, everybody stop. We can't use this system. We're putting people in the roles that don't belong there. So that's the problem. The problem is you don't have local control. Because your own local clerk wouldn't be putting the wrong people in the roles. They know everybody local. They're not going to make that mistake. So I've done the same thing month by month since 2014 because I'm able to download those data from the Secretary of State. But once again, you can't see the small counties, so I'm going to normalize it so you can see. And you'll notice that, for example, you can see that surge in every county right before 2016. All the counties surged at the same time, and then they've all just been climbing ever since. There's one county, Wheeler, that seems to have cleaned up the rolls a little bit. But since this is a percent scale and they're a tiny little county, it doesn't take much to make a big change. So that's what's going on with that. But anyway, I just wanted you to see, what I'm trying to do is I'm proving to you that your local clerk is not in charge of your rolls. The state is in charge of your rolls, and that needs to change. You need to be in charge of your own voter rolls. Here's another way to prove that your voter rolls are not okay. It's called the churn calculation. And imagine that 10 people move out of your county, out of 100, and 10 move in. We call that a 20% churn. So you have 100 people, 10 move out, 10 move in. That's 20 changes out of 100. We call that a 20% churn. So I always like to ask people, what do you think the churn is in your county? And over the last 3 years, I have multiple copies of your voter rolls, and I'm giving them to your local people to help them find phantom voters and fraudulent voters. And I'll say to them, what do you think the churn is in your county? So over the last 3 years, how many of the records in your rolls have been added or deleted? And if I told you that was 40%, that would shock you. In other words, your rolls in your county have changed 40% in the last 3 years. That's your churn. It's dramatic, and I can show you that. This graph shows, this table shows this, where it seems like every year you have the same amount of people being added or removed. Now, when you say something like that in public, the usual response of the clerks or the Secretary of State will be, "Oh yeah, that's normal, Dr. Frank. We always remove people that are dead or moved away or they're inactive." No, here I'm showing you that who's being removed and added. I can compare name to name. So I'm not looking at the totals, I'm looking at who they added and who they removed, and that is a consistent rate year to year. And it's the same in every county. So wait a minute, the same number of people are moving in and out of every county in Oregon? That's suspicious. I don't believe that. And obviously the local clerk is not, each local clerk isn't doing their duties in exactly the same relative proportions. That doesn't make sense. It's happening across the state. But even more importantly than that, not only have 40% of your records changed, but if you look at everybody who voted in 2020 in Coos County, 12% of them have now been removed from the rolls. And that number is the same all over your state. Why would 12% of the people who voted in every county in Oregon suddenly be not in your rolls anymore? And it's not suddenly, I take that back, it's 4% a year, and that's what my table showed. Now, these are all, this table I put in that video that was online, so people can come back and look at those numbers in more detail later. It's hard to talk about it. Now, everything so far I talked about is voter rolls. How am I doing on time, brother? Mr. Counsel.
Yeah, you have
10 minutes?
10 minutes, 45 seconds.
Beautiful.
I'll give you a reminder at 5 minutes and 1.
Appreciate it. So everything I've talked about so far is basically voter rolls. Now I'm going to talk about turnout. And so what I've done is I've shown as a percentage scale here the turnout for every county in Oregon since 1980. So it's every 2 years I'm telling you what the turnout is. And I've already normalized it for you. So you'll notice that, because it's hard to see the small counties, you'll notice that the turnouts used to be random in your state, but as of 2002, HAVA, Help America Vote Act, that's when you started adding electronic machines, and that's when Oregon started going full bore ahead with your all mail-in voting. You notice that it starts syncing up, and now all your counties are voting in sync. The turnouts are moving together. They're moving in the same proportional turnout, and that brings up this lovely graph. This is from your county. This is from the 2020 election. And what this graph shows across the bottom is the age of every one of your voters, 0 to 110 years old on the bottom. And the vertical axis tells you how many people there are. So the blue curve, this one here, I'll trace it out here, this blue curve along the top, that's the population of Coos County by age. That's your demographics. That's from the United States Census, the most recent one. And so what happens is, you'll note, I see you don't have a university here, because usually there'd be a lot of kids down here around 20 years old, and it looks to me like you're an older community. And in 2020, the most common age was around 65. So you're an older community, and then people begin to pass away, and that's why the curve drops off here. I joke about that. That's how God cleans the voter rolls. People pass away. Okay. So anyway, so the blue curve is the population, and then the black curve, well, let me do the gray curve first. The gray curve is everybody in your voter rolls by age. And you'll notice you have some ages where you have more people in the voter rolls than you have people. But this includes the inactive voters, this gray curve, this top curve. The black curve shows you how many people are in the voter rolls by age that are considered active voters. So if you just were to compare the black curve with the blue curve, the who's registered compared to who you have, you'll notice that about age 70 and up, you've got everybody registered. Everybody in your county is registered 70 years and older. And that's a surprising result. I don't think that's likely to be true. But even more scary, look at the red curve. The red curve is the number of people who voted in 2020 by age. And you'll notice that you have ridiculously high turnouts. Almost everybody voted too, as well, who's above 70 years old. So that's very suspicious. It doesn't necessarily prove fraud, but it also tells us which doors we need to knock on to find fraud, potentially. So these are just data. I'm just showing you what the Secretary of State will give anybody who requests it. And so these are data. I haven't said anything about any math or anything. Now I'm going to add a little bit of math. I'm going to say, you notice that this black curve and this red curve look similar in a lot of ways. Well, if I take the ratio between the black curve and the red curve, and I make a very simple assumption, if I assume that ratio is the same in every county in Oregon. So, for example, at 18 years old, looks like about 500 people voted in Coos County, are registered to vote actively, and looks like about 250 of them voted. So if I take the ratio between the black and the red curve, and I do that for every age, and then I make a really simple assumption. I assume that ratio is the same in every county in Oregon. In other words, I take one county, I look at who's registered, I look at who voted, and I say, what if that is the same in every county? What if I assume that, but I'm only looking at one county? Then I predict the light blue curve that's under the red curve. In other words, I can predict who voted by age in every county in Oregon to preposterous accuracy. So this is called the correlation coefficient. You know, in science, we're not allowed to say preposterous accuracy. We have to have a number. And so this R, it's called the correlation coefficient. This 0.998 tells you how good of a prediction it is. Now, what's important for me to say about this is not me saying, whoa, look how good of a predictor I am. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is I'm making an assumption. I'm making the assumption that if I look at one county, I can predict all the others. And guess what? I can, to 0.998 accuracy. That's preposterous that I could do that. And so I just wanted you to see, like, here's a county, Columbia County, 0.999. And notice they have the same problem. Their voter rolls are dirty as well. And they have ridiculously high turnouts for every age. Oh, so in other words, it's not just Coos County. Oh, this is the point I'm making. The problem isn't Coos County. The problem is the state of Oregon is imposing a system on Coos County that is making your elections not realistic and vulnerable to fraud. So here's Yamhill and here's Polk County, and I just want you to realize I've done every one of every county in your state, okay? And they're all preposterous, and they all reveal the same problem. Now, just one point of clarification while these are scrolling by. You notice I took a ratio between the black curve, who's registered, and the red curve, who actually voted, and I made an assumption. I said if I look at that for one county, I can predict all the other counties. What am I really saying? I'm really saying that everybody in Oregon, in every county, votes in exactly the same relative proportions, and that's kind of a stunning claim. Is that my 5-minute warning?
5-minute warning.
Thank you, sir. That's the assumption I make. Now you might say, well, gee, Dr. Frank, does that work anywhere else? Funny thing is, if I step across the border to Washington, it doesn't work. If I go down to California, it doesn't work. If I go across the border to Idaho, it doesn't work. In other words, that assumption only works in your state. Now I'll go to the neighboring state and I look at one county in that state, and if I assume that one county is the same as all the other counties in that state, guess what? I can predict everything in that state. So in the early days, I used this calculation to prove to people that the elections were centrally controlled state by state. And guess what? We know that. I just showed you the voter rolls are centrally controlled, so it's not a surprise that state by state they'd be centrally controlled. So the next thing is people say, well, how can that possibly exist, Dr. Frank? How can they be centrally controlled? The answer is because they are. And I was in the Washington County case with Tim Sipple, where the county clerk accidentally gave us a complete copy of her election management system, her EMS. And I have a copy of that, and I've studied that in great detail because I signed an NDA, so I was given that. And when your Secretary of State discovered that that was in the public, she ordered her Attorney General to file a restraining order against Tim Sipple because this is right their own words from the restraining order. Quote, even when systems are not directly connected to networks, they are vulnerable to attack through physical or wireless access. They're essentially admitting that these machines can connect to the internet, and that's them saying it, not me. Okay, but I've seen, now that I've seen the EMS, and now I've seen that the copies of the systems, absolutely. So the point is, and I can talk about this more later, the way that it's centrally controlled is that they're connected to the internet. Now the way that the fraud is happening, everybody thinks that the machines are flipping the ballots. So you notice I've hardly talked about the machines. I don't really think the machines are the core problem. The core problem is your voter rolls. But the machines are complicit because the machines tell the people, they report in real time what the tallies are. So if you're a bad guy and you want to stuff ballots, you need to know who's voted and you need to know what the tallies are, and that way you know how much to stuff. So this example from the state of Michigan, everybody's seen this graph where it suddenly jumps straight up. That's not ballot flipping, that's ballot stuffing. Someone looked and saw, oh no, we're behind. How much do we need to add? And they added what they needed to add. And that's the situation we are with you guys. You've got 30% ballots floating around, littering your sidewalk, and somebody just has to look at the machine reporting and say, oh no, we're behind. Let's scrape some of those up and stuff them. That's your vulnerability. It's a ballot injection. And if you think you have signature protection, signature verification, and that'll protect you, just as an example, and I think I'm going to run out of time with this, I just came from St. Charles County, Missouri. And we found a voter who was registered to vote in 1964, and she never voted, except absentee in 2020. So we went and knocked on her door. Felicia Jones isn't her real name. Just my example here. And we asked the county clerk, may we see a copy of her request for absentee ballot? So they gave us that, and sure enough, it was filled out by hand, and she signed the bottom. And then I said, we'd like to see a copy of her registration card from 1964. And when we looked at those two and we digitized them, the signatures were a perfect match, pixel for pixel. Okay, so clearly signature verification didn't work too well, huh? It worked too well. The problem is that you in your state have given away all the signatures for every one of your voters to an NGO called, a non-government organization called ERIC. You've given away all your DMV records. You've given away all your, I hear the bleep. You've given away all those records to an outside organization who now have all the information they need to steal your elections.
You have one?
Is that 1 minute?
That was 1 minute. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. So maybe what I have left. Yeah, so what are my recommendations? Okay, perfect. I didn't know I was gonna have 30 minutes, so that's a good coincidence. I think you need to have local control of your elections. I trust your clerk more than I trust your state. Bring it back under your own umbrella. And you need to have security evaluation of your machines. And I've been doing this all over the country, and you've heard some of them. Some of them make the media. It's called pen testing or penetration testing, where you hire somebody, they're a white hat, they're licensed to hack into your system to verify whether they're secure or not. And we have never failed, by the way. Every vendor, we can hack into every single machine. And I think, and I would recommend to you, and I did make this recommendation to you on July 2nd, what I've learned around the country is folks like you in your public meetings, we don't get to usually have one like this, by the way, I congratulate you on that. I recommend that you establish an election commission that you appoint to look into this in more detail and then make recommendations to you as commissioners to decide what to do going forward, because that gives you like a formal way to keep the issue moving forward and to explore every issue, and you don't have to do it in people coming up and you're standing here 3 minutes at a time kind of thing. So
Time's up.
that would be my recommendation to you, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Frank.
You're welcome.
All right. And by the way, that post-presentation applause is the only interaction that will be allowed. So thank you, and of course the same will apply for Dr. Grimmer when he's done.
Thanks.
Dr. Grimmer, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. I'm excited to present to you all. Let me tell you why I'm here. I grew up in a working class town with a working class family. And growing up in that town with that family made me love America and love American democracy. So I spent my career studying American democracy. I evaluate claims that there are problems in our elections, and I evaluate proposals to potentially improve American democracy. As part of my work, I've worked extensively as an expert witness in election litigation. I've been hired by many states in both parties, and I actually work with the National Bar Association to educate judges about how to evaluate experts in election cases. So what am I going to do here? I'm not going to try to convince you of anything. All I'm going to do is present to you some facts that we uncovered in our evaluation about claims that Coos County elections are broken. You don't have to agree with what I say to you today, but I want you to know that I took this very seriously, and we take these claims very seriously. And I also want to say we're available for questions, and my research group is happy to dive in to any claims that are made or concerns that you have. We briefly had the slides, and then now.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
While we're paused,
Yeah.
Doc,
Pause time, counselor.
we don't have a democracy. We have a constitutional republic.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, so I'm happy to discuss that.
Okay. But go on.
Well, if I'm still on pause, I'll just respond to that very quickly.
Sure.
So I agree that we have a representative democracy, and so democracy can mean a lot of
No,
things.
republic.
So
No.
if I please can just explain the way I'm using this very specific term here. Democracy is also defined within the field of political science to have a certain set of characteristics. And so I would agree with you. What you're calling a republic, I would call a republic as well. And of course, we don't have a fully participatory Athenian democracy where everybody's coming in and voting. We have first a representative democracy in many states.
Right.
And then beyond that, when we think about the federal government, that's a republic. We have states that come together and vote for the president, for example. That's not a democratic institution, that's a Republican institution. So I agree.
We also have
completely.
an Oregon Constitution.
100%.
All right,
Yeah.
let's get
Okay.
back into our time roll.
Okay.
But anyway,
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss that further. Okay. So when we do these evaluations, one of the things we notice is that both the left and right make claims that elections are broken, and these are often claims that are false or exaggerations. I'm not going to belabor this, but my group has spent a lot of time pushing back on claims, for example, from Stacey Abrams about things that have happened in Georgia elections. It turns out they're either exaggerated or essentially outright lies. We've been evaluating lots of claims in many different ways. So we, for example, have work where we debunk the claim that Russia caused Donald Trump to be elected. That's absurd. And we've also evaluated a series of claims made about and after the 2020 election about claims that were made about manipulation of those votes. What I'm here today is to talk about some of the evidence you just heard about and about what's going on in the Coos County elections. And specifically what Dr. Frank is presenting to you is he's making the claim that your elections are centrally controlled and subject to large-scale manipulation. And he's going to present broadly three kinds of evidence, or he presented three kinds of evidence. First, he makes the claim that your elections are unnaturally predictable. Second, he provides some evidence from canvasses of local neighborhoods, which I'm very excited to talk to you all about to get more details about. I know it was discussed at the last meeting. Some evidence from these canvases. And third, Dr. Frank makes the claim that there's too much churn in your voter file. This hides phantom voters. And what I'm going to assert to you today, or I'm going to show you what we uncovered, is that in each of these three instances, Frank fails to offer any credible and specific evidence of manipulation or fraud. And I'm going to go into details on each of these points. So first, when Dr. Frank makes the claim that he's able to perfectly predict, what I'm going to show you is that he actually uses the wrong test in order to make that claim. When we use the correct test, we find substantial prediction error, and this invalidates Frank's conclusion about a perfectly predictable election. Second, the evidence from canvases are not on their own evidence of fraud, but if there is credible and specific allegations of fraud, he should alert authorities. Anyone who has it should alert authorities. That is, I think, a first order problem. If fraudulent ballots are being cast and we know about it, then we should be investigated right away. That should be investigated right away. And third, Frank does this voter file churn analysis. And what I'll show you is that his conclusions about what's normal is based on his personal impressions. When I can consult things like statistics on movers and death and people who come of age, it turns out there's really nothing surprising about the amount of turnover that we're seeing in the Coos County voter file or voter files throughout the state. So I'll dive into each of these points and try to give as much detail as I can without being too dorky. So the first claim is that we're going to assess evidence about unnaturally predictable elections. So here's what Dr. Frank said at your last Coos County Commission meeting. He said the bottom line point is that your elections are not under your control. They're under control by somebody else. And statistics show that because they're under control of somebody else, I can predict every election in your state, which is a preposterous situation. And they've made documentaries about my work, and he summarizes and says, it's quite shocking. So from that documentary, we see the sort of line of argument that Dr. Frank articulated today. So Mr. Lindell asked Dr. Frank, he says, what you're saying is that across the state, every single 70-year-old across the state was exactly this percentage of turnout rate. Dr. Frank says, yes, every single county. And Mr. Lindell says every single age group, and he means in each county, was exactly X percent of each age group voted. And Dr. Frank says yes, which of course is preposterous. So this is a pretty clear empirical claim. And so my research group is able to evaluate that. And specifically what Dr. Frank claims in his presentations is that there's a single turnout key, and this turnout key is going to perfectly predict the turnout rate, that is the proportion of registered voters who turn out to vote for each county in each age group in the state. So we evaluated that claim. We got data from the Oregon voter roll data. We got data from Oregon on their voter file, and we used Dr. Frank's key, and we're going to evaluate that prediction. Okay, so I'm going to put a plot up here. So this plot here, on the horizontal axis, I have the age of the voters, and on the vertical axis, I have turnout rate. This red line is Dr. Frank's key. And so basically every point on this line is his prediction about what the turnout rate for that age group will be. And on this plot, I can now layer on the turnout rate for individuals in Coos County. And that's what these blue dots are. So you notice these blue dots are not all arrayed along this line. Some are below, some are above, some are on the line, in fact. But when we work in machine learning, so I've published extensively in machine learning, I have a book on it. So we make a lot of predictions, and we want to evaluate those predictions with a number. And so let's talk about how we might evaluate those predictions. So Dr. Frank has a predicted rate of turnout of 56.3% for 24-year-olds, let's say. And in fact, in Coos County, about 43% of 24-year-olds turned out to vote. That's a difference of 13.3 percentage points. To make these apples to apples comparisons, I'm going to make that a percent change. So that 13.3 percentage point change relative to the 43% true rate. And of course, we can calculate this error across all these age groups, and I can aggregate those up together into a very standard metric that we use in machine learning called the mean absolute percentage error. And that is 8.54%. That's far from perfect, which would be 0. So there's substantial error in the predictions for Coos County. But we can go to other counties in Oregon and we can see other different kinds of error. So in Multnomah, we get 6.18%. In Clackamas, we get 4.4. Josephine, 12.8. Wheeler is 15.5. And in fact, we can go place on this graph the turnout rate for every age group in each county in Oregon. And what you'll notice is there's a lot of spread along this line, which means that no matter what single prediction you want to make, you cannot perfectly predict the turnout rate in every turnout rate for each age group in every county with a single number. It's just not going to be possible. On average across Oregon, we get about an 8.9% error. So that's so it's clearly not the case that every age group is turning out at that same X%. So why does Dr. Frank think he is making a perfect prediction? So what my research group has shown is that when Frank makes these predictions, he's making two kinds of mistakes. So first, he uses the wrong quantity. Frank mistakenly predicts the turnout count, how many people who voted, rather than the rates, what percent of people in each age group voted. And to calculate that predicted count, what he's going to do is he'll take his predicted rate and multiply it by the number of people in that group. And second, he's going to use a correlation of those predicted and actual counts rather than a correlation of the rates. And what I'm going to show you is that the correlation of those counts is going to cause him to make what's often called a profound statistical error, an error that causes him to reach this incorrect conclusion that the elections are perfectly predictable. So I'm going to give intuition on this slide. I have a bunch of other very dorky slides, or very in the weed slides that try to eliminate this. I will give the intuition here, but I'll skip those slides, but happy to go back there in my 5 minutes or to answer questions. So what's going on here? So in a paper published with my colleagues, Michael Heron and Matt Tyler, we show that if there's differences in the number of people in each age group within a county, then a correlation of predicted counts is automatically going to be higher than a correlation of predicted rates. What's the intuition for this? When we use a correlation of counts, it's going to cheat. We care about, when we take a correlation, we're assessing how two variables move together. And we want to know when the actual turnout rate goes up, that our predicted rate goes up, and when the actual rate goes down, the predicted rate goes down. We'd like that correlation to capture that movement. But when we use a count, it's also going to be the case that that count's going to go up because there's more people in that age group that'll cause the predicted to go up as well. And there'll be more people or fewer people in the age group to cause that predicted count to go down as well. And that cheating leads to this incorrect perception that a correlation is close to 1. The mean absolute percentage error, one reason it gets used a lot in machine learning is it doesn't have this issue. And that's part of the reason it's a standard measure. So I have a bunch of evidence that I'm happy to go through about this. But I really wanted to get to content about assessing evidence from canvases. And I know there was some discussion of this in the last meeting, and I'm very curious about experiences about this. So Dr. Frank regularly claims canvases of neighborhoods reveal voter fraud. And I just want to emphasize again, if there's evidence of fraud, specific and credible evidence of fraud, this should be given to law enforcement officials. I think this is a very serious issue. What I'll also show, in instances where there has been where Dr. Frank has made specific allegations, we have found that he's sometimes confused about that evidence or what constitutes evidence of fraud. So for example, in July of 2023, Frank claims that he and a group of other individuals in San Joaquin County in California found some examples of dead people voting. So here's what Dr. Frank said. There's these two old ladies in San Joaquin County, and they sit all day. He sorted the voter file from oldest to youngest, and they checked the first 2,700 individuals. And he said they found 47 dead people. And he said that's a simple strategy. They are people who are casting ballots, but they didn't stop there just based on that voter file analysis. He says that he went and knocked on the door, got documentation, got the complete story. And he says that's just one simple way to go about doing this. But this is a specific claim, and my research group is very interested in identifying instances of dead people voting. We've spent a lot of time studying the rates of this in various states, and if it's happening, we would like to know about it because we'd like to prevent it. We think it would be a very serious problem if it were happening. And so here's an email I sent to the Registrar of Voters in San Joaquin County. It's like just an initial place to start. I said, hey, look, Dr. Frank's making this claim. It's a very specific claim. We'd like to investigate it. I had one hypothesis about what's going on. Perhaps people had cast their ballots and then died. And Ms. Hale responded to me, and she said, I'm pretty sure that if people would have found dead voters in my county, they'd come to me. They'd want me to deal with it as well. That would obviously be very important. And she says, I haven't heard anything about it. But what Hale did explain to me was that there were 47 voters who had been grandfathered in. So in California in 1971, they began requiring people to provide their birth year and birth date when they registered. But before 1971, they did it. And the people who were registered before 1971 were grandfathered in. And so as a placeholder for those individuals, San Joaquin County gave them a birth date of 1850, just as an indication that they're not, that's not actual data, or not actual birth year. That's just someone who they don't have the actual birth year for. So Ms. Hale gave me a copy of the San Joaquin voter history file and company voter file. So it is the case that in 2020, based on this information, 50 individuals cast ballots in the 2020 election with that grandfathered 1850 birth date. 3 of those were at voting center locations, which means that they went and voted in person in California. And then 47 of those were voted by mail. And so what we did, we used that information about those 47 individuals and a variety of databases about public records to verify that individuals were alive, real people and alive, when they cast a ballot in the 2020 election. And we were able to reach a conclusive determination for 46 of those 47 individuals. And we just could not reach, we have inconclusive evidence on the 47th. I wasn't able to show that they were dead, but I also wasn't able to show that they were definitively alive. So by and large, what this would suggest is this isn't evidence of anything other than a record-keeping oddity. It's not how I would recommend them keeping their records, but it is this sort of oddity. The point I would make, though, and I think a reasonable response to this, Dr. Frank could say, well, we had a different 47.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, totally fine. But then what happened to the evidence of those deceased voters? We should be reporting this to law enforcement officials. So I wrote to Olivia Hale on October 1st, and I said, has there been any instances of dead voters in San Joaquin County in recent elections? And she responded, to my knowledge, we have not had any dead voters, so no movement there. So again, if there's specific, incredible evidence about fraud, then Frank should release that evidence. It's very important. And if he's asking you all to change the way you're running elections here, he should be providing that evidence to you so you have an accurate understanding of what the exact problem is in Coos County. It is also important to note that a series of academic studies have shown no evidence of widespread dead voters. So using a variety of voter file data and death records, we failed to find instances of dead voting. It's vanishingly rare. All right, so the last type of evidence that Dr. Frank discusses is evidence of unnatural voter roll churn. So at the Coos County Commission meeting, he says, I did a voter churn analysis. What I mean by that is I took a snapshot of your voter rolls in January of 21, 22, 23, and March of 24. And then over this 3-year span, he compared the rolls, and he has a table that summarizes who moves. And he says 40% of the people in the rolls have changed in the last 3 years. We call that a 40% churn. And he asks, does that make sense to people? He says that doesn't seem natural. Okay. So that is, again, this interesting empirical claim. So we engaged in a very similar evaluation of the Coos County voter file. It's just useful to note as we're sort of contextualizing these numbers, the definition that Dr. Frank's using has the potential to double count. I don't think there's any deception here because he's very clear about the measure. It's just it can go up to 200%. So if everyone were to leave and everyone were to come back, it would be a 200% churn. So that 40% is counting twice a person who leaves and another person who arrives. All right. The first thing I just want to tell you is that there's a big literature in demography, statistics, and political science that describes the kind of churn you would expect, kind of turnover you would expect in voter files. And one of the surprising facts when I'm sort of teaching about this is that Americans move a lot, so much more than people, for example, in Europe. 1 to 3% of individuals move from one county to another in a state every year. And about 1 to 4% of people move from one state to another every year. About 1% of everyone dies every year. And about, in the population, about 1 to 2% of voters will turn 18 or they come of age. And so we can use those numbers in order to get a sense of what kind of turnover we would expect in the Coos County voter file. And so here I'm gonna just look at 2 snapshots. They come pretty close to the snapshots Dr. Frank has. I'm not gonna be disputing his analysis of the number of arrivals and departures. So there's a number of ways to slice and dice this. And I believe we arrive at very similar numbers about the people who are entering and exiting. Our disagreement's gonna be about whether that is a surprising number. Okay? But I just wanted to independently verify those numbers. So here are some numbers that we calculated. So if we first look at that 2021 voter file, we're gonna find that there's about 81.7% of individuals who are in that November 11th, 2021 voter file were also in that September 2024 voter file. That would mean 18.3% weren't. That's about 9,000 individuals. Where did those departures come from? So about 3,100 moved to a new Oregon county. So I have the Oregon voter file data, so I'm able to show that those individuals moved to a new county. About 1,500 to 6,000 would go to another state. That's going to be estimated from census data. This is an approximation here based on rates. One could dive very deep and try to do this with either tax records or other data from the Census Bureau. The problem with that is it may not capture everyone in the voter file. Approximately 1,500 folks would die over this time period. And you put that all together, and you'd expect there to be about 6,100 to 10,600 departures from the Coos voter file. Okay, we can also do this in the other direction. We can say, well, let's look at the September 2024 voter file and ask, well, how many people in the September 2024 voter file were in 2021? That's that same number, 40,892. That's 76% of people in that September 2024 voter file. That means about 12,810 are new arrivals in that voter file. Again, we can do a different sort of analysis. We can ask, how is it that people end up in Coos County in 2024 that weren't in the voter file in 2021? And about 3,300 moved in from another Oregon county, so I'm able to identify that. About 2,200 individuals come of age. I'm going to calculate that from the voter file. And about 2,600 are going to come in from out-of-state moves. And so the expectation there, as I wrote this down, would be about 7,000 to 12,000. That means there's slightly more arrivals than what this expectation would suggest, but not so many that you would be completely shocked. And if I were to add these numbers together, I end up with a number that's something on the order like 13,100 to 22,600 expected amount of total turnover. And it turns out that if you add these two numbers together, they're within that interval. So that would suggest there's really nothing surprising about this, the churn that we're seeing.
You have 10 minutes.
Okay, cool, I'm almost done. So I'm gonna do a bad presentational tactic. I'm gonna double back to the thing I didn't have time to get to. And I'm gonna try to convince you about this count issue. It's an interesting problem. Okay, circle back, we're talking about why the correlation of counts is gonna be misleading rather than a correlation of rates. So to do this, I'm gonna use a technique that's often used in statistics, particularly when teaching an idea. And I'm going to use a simulated example where I know I have exact control in order to illuminate a basic principle, and then we'll see that it's going to manifest in the real data. So to see why correlations of counts can be misleading, let's consider a fictitious county where there's no vote manipulation, because I've set it up like that. And we're going to suppose every age group has a different turnout rate. And initially what we're going to suppose is that there's not much variation in the number of people at each age group. And we're going to follow Frank's procedure in order to make a prediction. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to show you as I arbitrarily make one group bigger, but change nothing else, we'll get that correlation that Dr. Frank says is surprising. So here is the first simple plot that I'll show you. On the horizontal axis, I have the predicted number of individuals who turn out. On the vertical number, I have the actual. On the vertical axis, I have the actual number. And because there's not much variation across these age groups, the correlation of the count and the correlation of the rates are going to be very similar, and it's going to be 0.213. So there does not appear to be a strong relationship here. So as I click over to the next slide, all I'm going to do, I'm leaving everything else the same. We have the same prediction about rate. I'm just going to increase the number of 41-year-olds in our example county here to be 200. And when I do that, now the correlation is going to go to 0.924. If I do it again and I make there 1,000 41-year-olds, we're going to get a correlation that's nearly 1. And what's going on here again is that deception that I talked about, correlation gets fooled. It mistakes the variation in rate, the movement of the predicted and actual rates together with the predicted and actual counts. And this is not just a sort of theoretical exercise. This is in fact found if you look at the Coos County data. So here I'm just representing data I've already shown to you. And on the horizontal axis, I have the predicted turnout rate. On the vertical, I have the true or actual turnout rate. And I have a diagonal line here that shows if this was a perfect prediction, all of these points would fall on that diagonal line. So it's very easy to evaluate. And very clearly, they don't all fall on that line. Certainly some do, but some don't. And we can see the correlation between rates is 0.87. And remember that mean absolute percentage error is 8.54%. But when I do the correlation of counts, we can see that it looks like these points now move very close to that diagonal, and the correlation goes to 0.99. But if I use that mean absolute percentage error, I still have the same conclusion of about an 8.54% error rate. So in that way, the counts are misleading about the predicted performance, and in actuality, the elections or the turnout across age groups is not, in fact, perfectly predictable. All right, so I will now wrap up. I'll finish a touch early. Okay, so a big theme of my work and the work my research group does is that we evaluate claims from both the left and the right that about American elections, and what we find is that there's a lot of false and misleading claims out there. So we've written extensively about how claims from the left that American elections are being manipulated with voter suppression are just unfounded. There's no evidence to support those claims. Furthermore, in every time we've evaluated claims of manipulation or fraud, we've failed to find credible evidence, and certainly failed to find outcome determinative evidence. Furthermore, in work that I've done with my colleague Eitan Hirsch, we've shown that many reforms, most reforms, actually don't seem to benefit either party. So when you're considering what reforms you might do, it's useful to know that by and large, they're not going to benefit either Democrats or Republicans. Sure, there'll be questions that come up and lots of concerns about American elections. My research group is here to help. I'm here, obviously, now to answer questions, and I'm excited to talk about this further. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, I think before we go into our 5-minute sections,
I'm gonna set it up while you're.
you set it up.
Yeah.
We'll take a 5-minute recess here. We will be back at 10:39.
Oh, I know. I look at my phone. It helps. Oh, yeah. I just got a new phone, and I'm like, tell it to shut up. That's fair. If I put it in my phone box, I can you're not going to hear it. I do too. You know, I think we are.
Can you make me a presenter again? I'll get it set up. Make me a presenter.
I have ARR that I need to submit to your office.
No, if I better respond.
It's gonna be a few minutes.
I'm actually over here. We'll get you set. Yeah, I've got it in the card. I mean, I asked me an email and they said, well, okay, you can ask that question, but you got to fill out this form.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Oh, I know. And I was just like, well, now I know. Because I wasn't certain how to do it. I know how to do election evidence. But with this case, I was just like, had a curious question. Email and I said, okay, we'll take that exact same information and put it on this form. And then, no, I know. It's like, if it weren't for paperwork.
Well, they also need to be.
Exactly.
You know, we also avoid any.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I understand the process. I find it funny, but I understand. I'm like, okay, take the exact same information and put it on this piece of paper. And I'm like, all right, I can do that. It's pretty easy. Cut the days, boom, I'm done. But anyway, so yeah, that will be after the meeting. And just, at some point you're gonna have to say, okay, I can give you that information. It cost us $32.18, whatever it's like. And then I'll just wait from there.
You know, whatever you put in for a name, that's what it's about.
Yeah, how much was how much did it cost me to get my Yeah, but so I mean, it's like I'm fine with it reasonable. It's like, okay, it's gonna take somebody's time to answer this question. Yeah. And if I said, oh, and please give me like all 100 pages of these questions, well, that will cost me. Yeah, we get. Oh, I know. And I forgot their name. Okay, cool. Marty. Yeah. It's either the shirt or the coat. Or the shorts. Yeah, I stand out. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. But thanks for your time, and I'll get that. I have paperwork in the car, and I also have to hit the elections office. So after all this hubbub is done. Sure. All right.
Looks like my fellows can't see a clock.
You know, and I need to get to the clock. I keep thinking about it, and then I forget I'm getting out of here. I'm so relieved the meeting didn't crash and burn, and I go back to my office.
What we need to do is get them both shocking buzzers that I can just push the button. Yeah. It's a good one, yeah.
I'm trying to figure out which one would be happy to wear one of those and which one would not.
Local controlled elections, that they do a pen test for security about it.
So I have the three of you muted just in case there's a sidebar in the break.
And we would provide that tell flattery that much more flexibility after the election.
Like I said, I was crushed when I read it. I knew the county did that on purpose. Like, really?
All right. Where's my guy? Come on.
If you want to make an announcement, I can unmute and you can mute. So you just want to say, all right, let's get going.
Sorry, folks, we're just about a minute late here. I'm waiting for my other commissioners to return. We'll resume as soon as they return to the dais.
Easy to mix those martinis. Drew will have a lemon one.
And I see my fellow commissioners will be joining me here. That'll be Commissioner Sweet and Commissioner Main.
No, it's not much. It's really.
I see back at 10:39 and you guys are both leaving the room at 10:39. I'm like, okay. Hey. Okay.
We can't,
All right. Do we have counselor? All right. I will take timing duties. All right. Dr. Frank, are you ready to resume on your 5-minute? I'll get my timer going here. And oops, sorry, hang on 1 second. I'm looking for the. Okay, you ready? All right,
I'm ready, sir.
Go.
So I appreciate Professor Grimmer's comments. They are well thought out. He makes a fundamental mistake, though, in his analysis, and that he takes his technical advice from Mr. Lindell. Okay? In other words, he's done what he thinks my work is, not what my work actually is. So when I'm talking about predictable turnouts, here's your Coos County turnout. I predicted it, okay? He didn't, I did. So I'm just gonna make a very simple statement. We can go into the weeds, but can't in 5 minutes. He's doing something different than I'm doing. In logic, we call that a logical fallacy of the straw man. You create an argument about the other person's position that isn't their real argument and then attack that. So he didn't attack my true argument. And the point isn't that I can predict it. And the method which I use to predict it is not the point. And he's attacking the method. I get it. That's an academic approach where you're saying, well, I think you should do this analysis instead of that analysis. The bottom line is, I can predict it. It's the same in every county that I can predict. That's the point. And I'm using a different method than him, obviously, because I can predict it and he didn't. So that's kind of my answer to that. And the problem is that he's using an absolute percentage, not a relative percentage. And a lot of people have made that error, so I don't fault him necessarily for that. So when he's criticizing my ability to predict, the fact is, I am. There's an example, and I just showed you your whole state. Here's another one, Columbia. There I am, predicting it, okay? So it's not whether or not I can predict it or not that I'm trying to make the point. Anyway, and the method by which I do that is not really the point. The point is, they're all the same. That raises suspicion that they are all the same. That's the problem with that approach. Now, I really like it that he followed up. That's good academic practice with the San Joaquin County. And I can answer that question. I'll be happy to answer that in public. The reason that that's not public is because the sheriff is leading that investigation, because he's already had one conviction in Lodi because of our work there in court of a person who was stuffing ballots. Okay, so that's a matter of public record. You can look it up. It's Shakir Khan, I think is his name. And we did that. And so we have an investigation going on there. Now, if he wants, he could call the Fresno clerk, the clerk in Fresno, California, where we presented 19 people who died in 2005 and 2006, who afterward didn't vote for 10 years, but since we're voting in every election. And in that case, we presented the clerk, the sheriff, and it's 2 of the commissioners in person, death certificates, voting records, and the clerk was sitting right there looking up each one of them as we presented and said, yeah, that person died in 2005, here's the death, and yeah, they quit voting for 10 years, and yes, now they're voting in every election. So that would be one where we have brought it to the clerk. But we don't usually bring it to the clerks for a reason. It's because the clerks don't want to expose fraud. They take that personally. They think that blames it on them. And if you heard my talk, I was very clear. We're not blaming the clerk. We're blaming the state system for the problem. So that's why you have the clerk in San Joaquin hasn't heard anything. I recommend you talk to the clerk in Fresno. Now, in terms of knocking on doors, in my July 2nd meeting, you even mentioned yourself, Commissioner Taylor, that you knocked on doors and you found exactly what I was telling you you would find if you knocked on doors.
It's true.
So it's not, I'm not flying by the seat of my pants here. Now, I will say that in your county, we haven't done enough knocking on doors by my own standards. And we're not doing we're not like doing a statistical canvas where we're knocking randomly, we're doing a targeted canvas. And the reason we do a targeted canvas is we're just trying to prove that you have real problems. And that simple little canvas you did proves you have a real problem. And it's not just me saying it, your own governor said it today. Thank you very much.
That's right. 1 minute.
1 minute left, thank you. The other thing, and I appreciate this, that Professor Grimmer correctly pointed out that it's not a Republican-Democrat issue. Hillary complained for 4 years, well, not quite 4, she was quiet the last year, Russia for 3 years, that there were problems with the elections, and now it's the Democrats. And I don't take sides in that issue, I just want free and fair elections. In the lawsuit in Georgia where Professor Halderman hacked into the machines right in front of the judge, there it is right there. And guess who hired Professor Halderman? Hillary Clinton, 2017. So this is not a Republican-Democrat fight. This is a, do we want your state to remotely control your election, or do you want to personally run it locally? And that's the key. So in summary then, I think Mr. Grimmer is attacking my process, not the fact that I'm proving that I can predict it in every state. So how about, is that my 5 minutes?
That's your.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay, Counselor, you take it back.
Just get my slides up, please.
Sorry, I'll get this out of here right for you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not gonna move.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
and then I'll just leave it, I'm not gonna.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay, make sure I can you just click into the PDF so I can manipulate it? There we go, okay. So, I just want to respond to Dr. Frank's, assertion that I'm setting up a straw man here. I don't think that's the case. And I just want to say again, he is not doing this prediction. Let me just show you. So first, this is the turnout rates across the state for every age group. It's very clear. There is county to county variation in the rates people of different age turn out to vote. When Dr. Frank puts that plot up, he's showing a correlation of the counts. If he would use this calculation called the mean absolute percentage error, he would not conclude he was able to make this perfect prediction. I don't know what he means by relative or absolute. Absolute here just means that we're going to take the absolute value of the difference, so we're going to count under predicting by 10 percentage points the same as we would count over predicting, and that's just a standard way to make sure we don't confuse ourselves by having errors of different kind cancel each other out. So I think there's an important point here. I'm doing the exact same thing as him. When I do the same thing here in Coos County, you get the correlation of counts at 0.99, but you still have this standard measure of predictive performance at 8.54% because you don't get this deception from the correlation of the counts. So it's not a straw man, and I would just be curious to know what exactly he thinks the straw man is. That's exactly what he's doing. I want to talk a little bit more about automatic voter registration in the state of Oregon. So here in the appendix. Oh, one other quick point. Dr. Frank made the assertion that the keys are unique to the states. That's not what my research group found. When we pick up the key from one state and apply it to another, what we find is that if you focus on the correlation of counts, you end up with very high correlations. That's what this plot on the left shows. Essentially, all the correlations are at 1. But if you look at rates, you end up with a broader distribution, so a lower correlation of rates. So again, what's going on here is that there's a correlation of counts leading to this incorrect perception of predictive performance. Dr. Frank talks about a surge in registration, but that's a direct consequence of automatic voter registration. And I just want to go through some numbers. We might be saying the same thing here, we just sort of different interpretation of it. So in 2015, Oregon passed a law that allowed for what's called back-end automatic voter registration. When you have a qualifying interaction with the DMV, including proving your citizenship, you're automatically registered to vote. So as of in 2016, there's about 319,000 interactions of individuals who prove citizenship, not registered. They sent out mailers. 9,000 were returned undeliverable. 26,000 people opted out. That results in a registration of 283,000 individuals. It's not exactly clear to me why Dr. Frank thinks this correlation is a problem. It's a direct consequence of this policy. You might object to automatic voter registration, and we could have a discussion about that. But it doesn't mean these people shouldn't be there. These are just individuals who hadn't registered to vote, who interact with the DMV, and then they're registered. Dr. Frank also made a series of assertions about what experts about voter rolls say about what share of the population should be included. Again, it sort of depends upon what we mean by healthy or the appropriate number. It's certainly not the case that I've seen evidence that 1 in 4 people in the voter rolls don't belong there just because they were registered at the DMV. Again, these are individuals who have a qualifying interaction. They prove their citizenship. The DMV sends them this information, and they could opt out. So these are individuals eligible to vote. Seems reasonable these individuals would able to be registered. And of course, this additional registration would exceed population growth because, again, the DMV is identifying people who previously were eligible, but for whatever reason had decided not to register to vote. The last thing I'll say is the discovery of non-citizen registrants is a problem. Everyone should recognize that as a problem. It's on the order now of about 1,500 individuals, just so we have a scope of the problem. We've been trying to figure out what happened there. It looks like there's a poorly designed form at the DMV. When individuals were clicking that someone was not a citizen, it looks like they clicked that they were. That's a problem. That shouldn't happen, and the system should be designed better so that doesn't happen. But this is on the order of 1,500 individuals. And when we're evaluating policies, we want to trade off how a policy is going to affect different groups of people. And so certainly there is now a clearly established risk that if a poorly designed form is distributed, you could register non-citizens to vote. But that same process, that automatic voter registration, brought into the registration rolls hundreds of thousands of people who were previously not engaged with politics, not registered to vote. And I think it's important that those people be given an invitation, that they're included in politics. And so thinking about how to trade that off, I think, is an important component of how we evaluate every policy.
Is that it?
Yeah, that was 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay, all right, very good. Okay, Dr. Frank.
Me again. I agree with Dr. Grimmer. He's not doing my calculation. If he were, it would match my calculation. So no, he's not doing the exact same thing. Otherwise, he would get my answer, and he doesn't. Let me just give an example. He brings up the fact that there's a problem in your voter rolls and that it needs to be fixed. I agree. That's exactly what I'm telling you. And if you're allowing the state to make these kinds of large egregious errors, it's going to affect your local elections. Because why is that important? Because you mail ballots to these incorrect registrations. That's why this is important. If you weren't mailing ballots and you required people to come in person and show their ID, then I would agree it's not such an egregious problem that you have a dirty voter rolls. The fact that you're mailing ballots out like this to non-real voters is a huge problem. And you're about to experience something in your state because Judicial Watch is about to sue you. And let me just show you what's in your future, because I've seen these lawsuits all over the country. Judicial Watch is going to sue you. They're going to show you that a lot of people in your voter rolls don't belong there. Let me use one example. LA County, last February, was sued by Judicial Watch. They were required by law to remove 1.2 million people from their voter rolls out of 5.3 million. 1 in 4 to a little more than that. They were required. It was shown, and by the way, they win every one of these lawsuits because there isn't a single state in the country that's complying with the NVRA and HAVA. They're all failing to do so, and that's why they're winning the lawsuits. Guess what? They're going to win this lawsuit again, and your governor basically admitted it today, okay? Because your rolls are going to be full of people that don't belong there. So I would reiterate to you that the problem is not the system. The problem is that you're not in control of the system. As far as I'm concerned, you can vote with jelly beans. I'm not even complaining about the machines if you want to use machines, as long as you're in charge of them and you're the one who can take the cover off and look in the back and make sure everything's good. I trust you. I don't trust a state system. Somebody from far away automatically injecting people into your rolls without you knowing it is unacceptable to me. Your clerk, your local clerk, should be deciding everything. How'd I do in time?
2 minutes, 45 seconds.
I'll tell you one more story then. So I did this study, exactly like this sort of study, in Montana. And they have 56 counties. And I noticed that I could predict 53 of them spot on. But the 3 others I couldn't predict. And I was sitting there on an airplane flying there, and I'm supposed to give a presentation the next morning. And I'm panicked because I don't know what's wrong, and I've done something wrong in my math somewhere or other, because I can't predict these 3 counties. But it was late, went to bed, got up the next day, spoke to 500 people at a fairgrounds. And I showed my graphs, and I said, something's wrong, but at the minimum, I'm showing you that the elections are centrally controlled. I don't know what's wrong and why I can't predict these 3 counties, But I'll figure it out, and when I finally figure out where my error is or whatever it is, I'll post it online and you guys can know. Well, this big old cowboy walks up to the microphone. He says, "Nope, Dr. Frank, excuse me, sir. No, that county that you can't predict, that county ain't connected to the internet." That's what he said. And so it's a beautiful control experiment for me, because I had no idea. They're just numbers to me. And I'm sitting in front of a computer and I can predict all the counties. Guess which 3 I can't predict? The ones that have more cows than people, the ones where there's more tumbleweeds than houses, okay? I mean, this is like out in the middle of nowhere. They have no internet. It's not centrally controlled. So guess what? Where it's not centrally controlled, I can't predict it. Where it is, I can. That's like a beautiful control experiment. Scientists love that when you do an accidental control experiment. And I'm a physicist. In fact, they even had a scholarship to Stanford for physics, and I just didn't take it. So we could have been colleagues. Am I done? By 5 minutes, it's probably up.
We got another minute.
Oh, I have another minute. What is it? Maybe I'll just relinquish it to you guys. You can ask me questions if you want. Thank you very much.
Commissioner, you have a question for Dr. Frank?
No, not at the point.
Not at this time.
A little bit later.
In the spirit of symmetry, I'll try to keep it at 4 minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good, very good.
Okay, so I just think Dr. Frank and I need to compare spreadsheets and math, because very clearly I'm doing the same thing he's doing. I am finding that 0.99 correlation, but what I'm showing you is that is a result that is a confusion that the correlation metric has. When you use this other metric, mean absolute percentage error, which is more appropriate for this task, you find substantial variation. And again, I can show you that there's a lot of variation in the turnout rates across counties in Oregon. And so I'll just put this up again, just to drive this point home. This incredible amount of variation means that no one could possibly predict the turnout rates for every age group in each county with a single number. It just cannot be done because there's so much variation. What I would suggest, Dr. Frank says that the way to address these problems is by switching to having local poll books and hand counting. I think there's a number of interesting and detailed discussions to go in there, which I'm very happy to talk about. What Dr. Frank hasn't shown to you is that the problems that he's identified, even if we were to agree that they are there, stipulate to there, that they're not present in instances where we hand count or have a paper poll book, or there are not new problems that are potentially worse with the hand count or paper poll book. And so just to think through what could go on, if we were to make that sort of contrast, that's what we want to think about if we were evaluating a policy. What could go on with a paper poll book locally, it could be hard to identify people who move across counties, which Oregon actually does a good job of now. When individuals go to the DMV and they update their address, that'll automatically be propagated through to the voter file because of that interaction. That would be harder to do if there was no DMV-like system. Hand counting, there's a lot of discussion about hand counting. I know Dr. Frank's very passionate about it. And I know European countries hand count. There are also big differences with the structure of ballots. European countries tend to have simpler ballots. American elections have many, many races on the ballots, which can make it very hard to do that counting. Not impossible, but it can lead to more error rates. It can lead to higher error rates, excuse me. So that's, I think, a thing that we have to keep in mind as we're making these sorts of comparisons. I think, how am I doing on time?
2 minutes, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'll stop there and then look forward to questions.
Okay, very good. Let's move into any commissioner comments or questions at this time. Commissioner Sweet, you have anything at this moment?
A question to both presenters. Dr. Frank, when you were here last, you, at least in my mind, represented that we could very easily change our voting system and do what we want as a county. I found that a little incredulous.
Easy is not a quantitative word. Go ahead.
You talked about a county, Shasta County,
yes,
in Northern California,
yes,
and just up and done that.
Yes.
How has that worked out? How did they do it? Because I assume that California doesn't let each county just go off and do their own thing.
Yeah, I mentioned the case of Huntington Beach, for example.
No,
They-
but I'm not here.
I'm gonna come back to Shasta,
Okay.
but I'm just, so you can understand my answer about Shasta. Huntington Beach is a charter city, and right in their own charter, it says, and that's a signed off charter by the state, that they have the right to run their own elections. So that's why it was easy for them to do that there. Shasta's working on a similar charter. What happened is in 2023, January, the Board of Commissioners voted to not continue the Dominion contract. And they made that decision based upon the election commission they'd established that had recommended that to them. And so then the following month, they had more hearings, and then the following month, they voted out that they weren't gonna use the electronic poll books. So in terms of ease, yes, those are easy steps. What then happened is the state was very unhappy with what was going on, and the state actually sponsored a recall election of the third commissioner, because they had 5 commissioners, not 3, and that, his name's Kevin Cry. And Kevin Cry survived that recall election. And so then the state paid for a hand recount and paid $400,000 for it, and he survived still. So that shows that is that easy? No, that's a war. So, maybe my statement easily switch back, maybe I'll take that back. You can take back control. To say it's easy is probably a mischaracterization. You're right, I would concede that to you. But you can certainly do that, and we did it for 200 years in this country. We only kind of switched over to all this automatic stuff 20 years ago, and we were only 10% smaller as a country. There's no reason why we can't go back to something. And really, to me, the reason why you should go back isn't necessarily because I hate machines or anything like that. It's because your people don't trust them anymore. And so if you people don't trust your elections, that's going to diminish your turnouts. That's going to make this turmoil go on. And it's not a Republican-Democrat issue. Both sides of the aisle don't trust it anymore. So that's what I'm recommending to you. Did I kind of answer?
You did, but.
Don't give up on me. Dig in. I'll try to answer.
It's pretty easy to assume that one way of doing business, there's something wrong with it.
Yes.
But you're not comparing that to anything. So,
And that
I
was-
find it hard
that was his point.
to believe that there wouldn't be similar concerns about hand counting. In fact,
Let me address that. I think that's a
opens the
great point.
door to individuals.
Yes,
Do what
I'm
they're
not.
supposed to do.
I'm not saying that by switching back to local control, you're getting rid of fraud. Absolutely not. There's been fraud as long as there's been elections. What I'm saying is right now, I can hack your election from my basement in Ohio. And if you go back to local control with local ballots, and then I can't anymore. So yes, certainly, we have a long staid tradition in this country of election fraud. There's all kinds of, in 2004, for example, Clint Curtis testified before the legislature in Ohio that he wrote the software that a Republican senator used to cheat the election there. That's online. You can watch that testimony. So my point is not necessarily that paper is a panacea and that electronics are evil. My point is that because it's all been electrified, it's now networked, and anybody in the world can get into it. A high school level hacker can get into your elections. And that's why I'm recommending to you that you do a security check on that. And I've done this all around the country. You can look them up, and we never fail. The elections are vulnerable electronically because of that. How did I do on that?
Fine.
Okay. And do you want to?
Commissioner Maine, you have anything?
Yeah.
Franklin, can you stop sharing your screen?
Oh, yes. You're welcome.
A couple of things. Dr. Grimmer, you talked about multiple times about machine learning. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to stop.
No, it's okay. I'll respond from here. So machine learning is an academic field that is a sort of merge of statistics and computer science. And so in the field of machine learning, it's about developing statistical and algorithmic models where we take inputs and make a prediction or some output. And the thing that the machine is learning about is how to use the inputs that you're providing in order to make the best possible prediction. And so that idea of machine learning, so I don't know if you all saw the Nobel Prize announcement in physics was for 2 gentlemen who developed a thing called a neural network. And that's basically a machine learning technique. The idea is that you take these inputs and learn how they relate to some output in what's called a training data set, and then you pick that up and make a prediction in another place. And the idea of machine learning is the sort of output from it is everywhere in our lives. So it's in our phones, in our cars. big classes.
Yeah, the new AI, all that stuff.
Yeah, like for example, large language models like
Mhm.
ChatGPT. That those are actually examples of neural networks.
Right,
Very
right.
large neural networks. Yeah.
But I do have a problem with that whole thing.
Do I have a problem?
I have a problem with machine learning,
Uh,
which is,
yeah, please.
it's the programmer who programs it. Depending on their mindset, it's which way it goes.
Okay, so
Mhm.
have you asked a question? I can respond, or do you want?
No, just a statement.
Oh, okay.
The other one for everybody is that I have multiple issues with our current voting system. One is that I always wondered about this motor voter thing, which now is blown up in everybody's face. But this other one, House Bill 2208, which this particular part I'm going to read was not changed in House Bill 2208, but 2208 is a modification of this bill. In 2208, as previous bills, Section 5B8, quote, if the elector returns the ballot by mail and a postal indicator is not present or legible, the ballot shall be considered to be mailed on the date of the election and may be counted if the ballot is received no later than 7 calendar days after the election. So no matter what party you're in, if your particular candidate is behind by a few votes, you run down the day after the closing of election on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, obviously. You got 6 more days or plus. You can find out who didn't vote and go out there and grab votes, legally ask these people to vote and turn the ballot in by mail, and you've changed the election. What in the hell? That is totally wrong in my opinion. Totally wrong. It should be cut off, period. If you don't get your ballot in on the close of election at 8 o'clock on Tuesday, you don't get counted. So get yourself together and get it in a week before. But this whole thing of 7 days after with no date stamp at all on the ballot is totally wrong in my opinion. Into my rant.
I agree with Bob on that. I don't understand, maybe Dr. Frank or Dr. Grimmer would have an idea of why our state did that. I'd like to push back on it, but first I gotta figure out what we're pushing back.
Did what?
Allowed what Bob just described, non-postmarked ballots to be accepted well after the day of election.
I'm sure Professor Grimmer would agree with me that the kind of overriding philosophy these days in elections, we don't want to disenfranchise anybody. So I think that's the answer to that.
Well, I think there's a little variation across the states.
Every state's different, but that's kind of the overriding
orientation.
It's like we don't want to disenfranchise anybody, so we better accept every ballot.
To me, you're not disenfranchised if you get your ballot in early. Come on.
I would just say that I personally, my preferred policy would be to say ballots are accepted up until close of polls on election day, and then we'll cut off.
Yeah.
That's the right.
It avoids exactly this issue.
Yeah.
I think that facilitates counting much faster, which is a big correlate of how much people trust the outcome of elections. I would say though that the particular kind of fraud that you're worried about, I think would be difficult to execute because you'd have to, even if you could identify those individuals, you have to then go hunt them down, find their ballots, collect those ballots. That would be hard to do in a substantial enough number to affect.
Actually, not necessarily, because one year I won by 14 votes.
Yeah, so there can be close elections, absolutely, but it is hard to do this in a.
So all you need is another 8 or 10, and you win.
Conditional on knowing the number of votes
Because
that come.
everyone that's the other way is 2.
Can I talk about that?
Yes.
So I testified December 8th, 2021 before the Wisconsin State Legislature. And in that presentation, I put into evidence the software developed by CTCL, the Center for Tech and Civic Life, in cooperation with the Milwaukee County Clerk. We have the email chain, we have the source code, we have the websites, we have the app. We turned it all in to to them. And what it does is it allows anybody with a cell phone to walk up to a house. I'm sorry, finding my cell phone. I can walk up to a house and they can say, who's registered to vote here? And oh, they aren't registered to vote? Bing! Now they are registered to vote, okay? The software does that, okay? And by the way, then the next button you go, boing, it automatically orders an absentee ballot for them. So I agree with Professor Grimmer. It would be hard to go out and round up people who haven't voted, but it's easy to do with the computer because the computer knows who didn't already vote, and it will automatically order the ballots for them. And here's the key that people don't realize. It doesn't, when the app orders the ballot, it also fills in the field that says when the ballot was mailed. So you're ordering a ballot, but you're also indicating that it was already mailed out. Therefore, there's no clerk that's going to mail a ballot. But guess what? Now I just sit in my basement with my ballot printer and I print the ballot and I turn it in. And the way we exposed all of this was because the clerk, county clerk of Milwaukee, received 120,000 more ballots than she mailed out. She even says so in her own emails, and we proved that before the legislature. So in principle, I agree that it would be hard to go around and scrounge up ballots the way Professor Grimmer described, but it's a piece of cake to do it if you have the software, if you have the machine learning.
And who would, a question,
Could I please just?
well, hang on a sec, come back up, I got a question for you. Now, who was this that did this?
The CTCL, we have the email chain.
What
6
is
months.
that?
The Center for Tech and Civic Life.
That's what I wanted you to say.
Yeah, in fact, the lawsuit.
Now-
Oh, go ahead.
In my research, after we turned down this grant of 50 grand because of that
Yeah.
sort of thing, that the clerk wanted, our county clerk,
Yeah.
I found out that 28 states have banned any kind of grants,
Yes.
monetary, whatever, from any particular group at all, period. 28 states have now banned that
Right.
practice.
Why do you want outside money changing your election?
Yeah, right, but, so we voted against that and turned it down, and a lot of people gave us flack because we turned down general fund money, which wasn't really general fund money in the first place.
No.
It wasn't for salaries in the first place, it was for a camera, armed guard,
Yeah.
which they can't have in the courthouse, and a video.
I've read those grant applications that the counties submit, and we submitted several copies of them in my December 8th testimony in 2021 before the legislature. And right in the fine print, can you imagine, it actually says this right in the grant application. If you accept this money, you agree to install unsupervised drop boxes in your county. It says right there, you agree to install unsupervised drop boxes in your county if you accept this money. That's what it says right there in writing. You don't believe me? You can go look it up. And so, bottom line is, we should never, ever sacrifice the integrity of our elections for convenience. Even if they're harder, fine. I would rather wait a week for a real count than to have it fast and have it capable of being fraudulent.
So one of the things I want you to think about, I wondered about, if we ever went back to vote in person
Yeah.
with ID,
Yeah.
et cetera, a lot of people complained of the convenience of mail-in ballots, that they can't get to the polling place, et
Yeah.
cetera, for
Yeah.
whatever reason. What happens if you had 8 to 8, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, 5 whole days to go vote?
As long as you're in charge of it, I'm
In
good.
person.
I'm good. You can decide whatever system I think
So
works good
therefore,
for you.
you could go down on a weekend or whatever,
Sure.
because you can't have the complaint anymore that you don't have time.
Right. The in-person solves the fraudulent ballot. Now, you're always going to have a certain percentage because, I think a military person deserves a ballot more than me. A person who's serving our country, and there's a certain percentage of those you're always going to have. But it's a small percentage. 1 or 2% of your ballot would normally come in by mail. And what that allows is it allows your clerk to do due diligence on every one of those. Right now, you have 30, 40,000 ballots coming in. They can't do their due diligence on every one of those.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, very good.
You have
Just
Point.
a few points. First, if you were to engage in that sort of door-to-door registration, individuals registered through an app would still have to provide identification in order for their ballot to be counted. And so even in states that don't have voter identification, you'll often see in the voter file, there'll be a data point that says, is voter ID required? And that's as a result of the Help America Vote Act. When people register to vote online, and if they don't provide identification at the time of registration, they then need to provide that identification in order for their vote to be counted.
Yeah, I've read where those ballots get set aside until they actually verify.
If they don't provide the identification at the time, they'll be cast provisionally,
Yeah,
and
right.
depending upon the state's
Correct, yeah.
curing rules, which is the opportunity to address errors, those individuals have to provide identification.
Professor Grimmer is correct, and that's why in the app, it actually retrieves the identification from the DMV and puts it in the application. The cool thing about the app, it's very clever, is they pull all the evidence, all the social security data, all the DMV data, they have all the signatures, they have all the ID, and it's automatically put into the rolls right past the eyes of the clerk as a valid voter, and it's not put into the rolls as somebody who identity is required. In principle, that's the way Professor Grimmer is describing it is the way it should work, but in this case, like I illustrated, it didn't work this way. And that's the problem of having electronic systems, because anybody can manipulate them who knows their way around electronic
However,
systems.
social security numbers were never supposed to be used for ID.
But boy, are they ever.
Yeah.
So I just add one more point on the
Yes.
Center for Tech and Civic Life. So I know there's lots of controversy around this, lots of state laws have been passed. There is a very well executed paper by two political scientists that assess the effect of the Center for Tech and Civic Life on election outcomes, and they find a very precisely estimated 0. It is not the case that places that received Center for Tech and Civic Life grants saw an increase in votes for Democratic candidates. So whatever is going on, I'm skeptical, but I haven't investigated the specific claim about the identification being pulled in through the app in Wisconsin. Whatever is going on, we know from the evidence from each state that there had no effect on the election outcome. And as a result of that, whatever fraud's happening must have been so small it couldn't be detected with some very well executed statistics.
Okay, however, as a counterpoint, 28 states have outlawed that practice.
So there's two different issues there. So you could have a normative objection to money coming in, because you could say that we think only state funding should be determining our election outcomes, or you could have a Bush v. Gore style objection where you think that if only some counties get this money, there could be asymmetry in the access within a state, and that could create some issues. That's different than saying that we've done a serious policy analysis of that money and saying it has no effect. So I think those can be two different things. And you could object even if that there was a 0, but just the fact they passed those laws doesn't mean that there was an effect.
Well, I don't care whether it's one side of the aisle or 40 sides of the aisle, whatever it is, it doesn't go well with me to have that particular practice.
Yeah, so I'm not trying to convince you either way.
Yeah, I know.
I'm saying that just two different issues. There's not an effect of this money on elections. Separately, we can have a variety of views about whether that money should be there. I think that's a point of reasonable disagreement.
And the county is going through a really tough time now with our general fund, which the county clerk is part of that, as well as the jail and the sheriff and the DA and all that. We're going through a very tough time because of the squeezing of the federal and state governments on the counties. But anyway.
I think there's a really important clarification to make here. I agree that the study he referred to, I read that study, showed that there was no net change on the Republicans and Democrats turnout. But that belies an underlying assumption. That exposes an underlying assumption. You're assuming that because you know which Republicans voted and which Democrats voted, that went certain ways. I find more stuffing for Republicans than I find for Democrats when we actually find fraud. Think about it. If you're going to try to cheat and you're going to try to stuff 50 ballots, you're going to want to disguise them as well as you can. You're going to stuff them for people that are beyond suspect. Let's say that, Commissioner Taylor's out of town for a month and you can't vote for some reason or another. I'm going to cast a ballot for you because nobody's even in question whether that's a real one or not. So in other words, if I have access to the list of who's voted and who's not voted, and I need to stuff ballots to manipulate an outcome, I'm going to look for the least suspicious voters and stuff ballots for them, and those tend to be Republicans. So the study, I think, is based upon a faulty assumption. It's assuming this is a Republican versus Democrat issue, and I've been telling you from the beginning, I don't think it is. I think it's a we the people versus a central control issue. But anyway, that's a very important thing. So when you said that the Zuckerbergs had no effect, I disagree. I would qualify that comment. I would say it had no effect on the relative reported turnouts of Republicans and Democrats. That's a completely different thing. How do you know that there are Republicans that hate Trump? There are a lot of them, believe me, I met them.
So just a point of fact here. The outcome in that study was the vote share for Donald Trump. Okay, so it's not that there were Republicans or Democrats who turned out to vote. The outcome there was the relative performance of Trump in locations with CTCL money and locations without. So unless the allegation is that this surreptitious organization that's doing the stuffing, and I'm still not quite sure who it is, did this in a way to like basically balance between Trump and Biden in the 2020 election, then I'm just not sure what they're even doing, why they would risk this felony and have this grand conspiracy if there is no effect. So it's on the vote outcome.
For me, I don't care what the flavor is, party, but the possible perception of some kind of influence is not good for me.
Right, I have a question before we go to public questions, and that is, Professor Grimmer, are you proposing that that the phenomenon of phantom voters in an all mail-in state like Oregon is actually not a problem?
Yeah, I think we want to put a lot of context around what problem would mean, and so we want to get very precise numbers about how big it is. And I was, very curious to hear about your experience canvassing, and I hope we can talk.
So that's what I'm leading up to,
Yeah.
because really, I perceived that you were postulating that it's not a significant problem. It isn't enough of a problem to really impact our elections. However, my personal experience and based on the predictive analysis of Dr. Frank's work product, my wife and I went out with a walk list that had, I believe it was like 17 addresses. And at each of these addresses, there was identified an individual who had voted, but it was suspected that this person was a phantom voter. We went out, and in total we found, I believe we found 12 or 13 that were in fact not known at that address. The first 7 right in a row we hit. The people who lived at the residence in question either A, did not know the individual at all, or B, indicated they had this individual at the house for whatever reason, but that person had not lived there for several years. And yet, in all of those cases, they were identified on the list because they had voted in the 2020 election. So we found 7 out of 7. So I would just like to know if phantom voting like that, and the ballot harvesting of those phantom voters is not a significant problem, how is it that Dr. Frank was able to identify so clearly where they are, and it was a substantial number on all of the lists that were provided, and how do you explain a 100% success rate in the first 7 we hit?
Sure, yeah, so I would just like to know a lot more about how that list was generated and how those individuals were identified. So one way in which you could vote from a location and then be labeled a phantom voter, of course, is if you move. So you no longer reside at that location, and new people reside there. Then you would knock on the door, they'd ask about it. If you didn't know who lived there before, for whatever reason, you'd say, well, I don't know who that person is. They'd be identified as a phantom voter. So that'd be one way in which you could see that sort of turnover. So I'd be curious to know what share of people are in that group. The more interesting group are people who used to live somewhere and don't live there anymore. Every state has different requirements on residency. And so I would also like to know more about that specific location where that happened, because individuals can still claim a location for their Oregon residency, even though they're not living in the state. So it could be a complicated decision. That's still an individual who's voting, and they may only be voting once. But all that's to say is there are individuals who double vote in every election. and they're registered to vote in Florida and New York is the classic example. So people are snowbirds and go down to Florida. That happens. Those people are often prosecuted, but usually that's on the order of 10 individuals in the whole state of Florida, for example. And so just would love to dig in on those numbers that you found so that we could get better context to know, are these examples of individuals who have moved or otherwise are claiming a residency that legitimately can, or is this a phantom voter? And then the last point you made about ballot harvesting, that is an interesting question. And I would also like to know more information or try to acquire more information about who the supposed groups are that are going out and collecting these ballots and casting them for these phantom voters. Because that would be very difficult to do, to go door to door and collect the ballots and then sign them and read and submit them. So I think it's much more likely to be in a situation where you could have identified a double voter, someone who's living in Washington and Oregon, and maybe they vote in both states or register in both states, and they don't vote where they think it's more interesting to vote. That could happen. That's pretty rare, but that can happen. I think it's less likely that there's some organization collecting these ballots by identifying these individuals, but we wouldn't know until we investigated about that organization. But we have to know more specifically about who Dr. Frank thinks that organization is, who's perpetrating this fraud in the state of Oregon. And the only way to know that is to submit these things to law enforcement. If we
Right,
think there's
okay,
something
well,
legitimate.
that's a perfect segue to invite Dr. Frank to kind of speak to that question, because I'd really like to understand.
Yeah. In the state of Pennsylvania, when I was invited by that legislature to investigate the election, we discovered a minimum of 32 NGOs. 32 NGOs that had back-end access to the state voter rolls. We have all this documented, presented in formal reports to the legislature. A minimum of 32 non-government organizations that had back-end access. What does that mean? That means if they want, they can add somebody to the voter rolls without supervision by a clerk, and then they can add them to the rolls, and then they know that's not a real voter. And then what we found is in the state of Pennsylvania, tons of ballots were being cast for those voters. So in other words, you're putting in people who are not real voters and then casting ballots for them. Now, we didn't need to go to the House and gather up those ballots. For example, you might have seen the newspaper articles back near the election in 2020 of the United States postal contractor who was driving 200,000 completed ballots from New York to Pennsylvania. He was arrested. And that pallet of ballots were completed ballots, already in their envelopes, no postage, ready to drop in drop boxes, okay? So those are not ballots completed by Pennsylvania residents. That's being completed somewhere else. And that was the point I was making in my Milwaukee point to you, is that everybody thinks, oh, in order to steal a ballot, we have to go out, we have to order a ballot, we have to go and take it out of their mailbox, or we have to go talk to the people. That is one way, but that's a hard way to do it. I agree with Professor Grimmer, that's a hard way to do it. The simpler way to do it is to be a good programmer, which I am. I've been programming my whole life. I was one of the first 300 people on the internet. I know what I'm doing, okay? All you need is a good programmer and a good piece of software, and I can sit there in my basement and I can print all the ballots you need, and I already have access to the signatures and the IDs and everything because of these large databases that have been made available. So you don't necessarily have to go knock on doors to collect and cheat. Obviously, there are ballot mills, and we have I've sat in skiff rooms with federal agents who've taken photographs of some of these ballot mills. This is a real phenomenon. And because we're electronic, that's the problem. It enables this remote access to our elections. And did I address it?
I think so.
Okay.
Can I just address this bit about the truck driver? So it's just not true that we have verifiable information from this truck driver that those were completed ballots. The way this goes is this truck driver was driving ballots in what he thought were ballots into Pennsylvania, and then he thought it was surprising that his truck didn't get picked up on time. An organization took his deposition where he says, well, I can't really estimate very well. I don't actually know that they were completed ballots, because how would you know? I would guess that there are some ballots there. Then another organization came in and used their resources to come up with a large estimate, what they would call 200,000. I would encourage you to read this gentleman's deposition, and I'm happy to send it to you. In that deposition, he says, I'm not very good at estimating, and I'm not really sure exactly what's going on. Subsequently, the Postal Service has done an investigation of this, and they've confirmed that those were not ballots. Those were not ballots coming from a ballot mill. And the story really doesn't stand up. The individual who's making these allegations is also not particularly credible, has a number of felony convictions, he is a ghost hunter. So he's just someone who's not a very credible witness. By his own account, doesn't remember this stuff that well. And we really just have no idea what was actually in that truck. So the Postal Service has investigated and confirmed it's not 200,000 ballots.
Okay.
How about photographs of a ballot mill from a National Justice Department agent where he took pictures in the ballot mill in Maricopa County? These are not imaginary places. So I mean, if he wants to question that one, I can give him another one, and if he wants to question that one, I can give him another one. The state of Pennsylvania certified their election at the time with 765,000 more ballots than voters. That's a matter of record. So we could go on and on. Example, retort, example, retort. In the end, your people don't trust your elections anymore because they're accessible remotely.
Right. Okay, I'd like to, at this time, go ahead and open up the floor for public questions. I saw Danessa was the first hand that I saw come up, so Danessa, please. And as a reminder, your questioning time is limited to 1 minute. We're not looking for a statement, we're looking for a question. It can be posed to either gentleman, and please go ahead.
Danessa Rains, Myrtle Point, Oregon. My question is, why don't we take it back as local control when the deaths happen here, the property sales happen here, all the return ballots go in a box in our clerk's office that are heaping, and why aren't those taken off our rolls right after an election? Why does our ballots have codes on them to identify our parties on the outside, and we've already got problems with postal people delivering our postmarked prepaid envelope? We're already having problems with them delivering them on time, so that we can't even trust our postal service getting them here. That's why I want to know why we don't do it locally when all these things happen in our own county, and why are we subbing this out to the state to do these electric ERIC system? They're all pointing their fingers. It's the DMV hasn't done an audit, and the Secretary of State hasn't done an audit. So that's my question.
All right. And that didn't seem like a question that really can be directly answered by either one of our gentlemen here.
I
So
have just a very brief response to that.
yeah.
So I watched a very interesting documentary. It's called The Curious Case of Coos County.
Yeah.
And the allegation, excellent. And the allegation there about the barcode about the party was on the outside of the envelope. And I believe that's only for the primary election to identify which party an individual is deciding to participate with the primary election. That's not the case for the general election. No reason for it.
I second that. I think he's correct. I also looked into it.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Right.
Keep in mind, if they're making comments from the audience, we probably won't get that online or in the recording.
Yeah, so yeah, that's right. Comments that aren't made into a microphone will not be on the recording. In fact, I would, if Doctors Frank and Grimmer would be willing to just both sit at the table,
Sure.
that way responses can be fed into the system.
What I said, since I was in the audience, is I seconded his comment.
Yeah.
I also looked into that allegation, and it's correct, but it's for the primary. And I'm not sure that matters in the primary. You can sort the ballots ahead of time.
Public record.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
And-
and I'll just say it's a product of Oregon having closed primaries, where you can only vote for the candidates that you're a party for. So if we had open primaries like other states, then that wouldn't be necessary.
Well, and I'll just one moment, please, Mary. I'll interject that when I posed this question about the party identification codes on the primary ballot envelopes, what I was told was that this facilitated the correct ballots to go into the envelopes. But that absolutely does not square with the fact that in that particular election, there were 54 different ballot styles.
Right.
So that was a complete fabrication. But anyway, I think that that is no longer happening anyway. Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Gentry. My question, I have a zillion of them, but I'll settle for one.
Mary, can you speak?
We're gonna close that door. You need to go around and release that, sir. Thank you.
I think Mary has to speak in here.
Is there
Yeah.
is this a microphone?
Yeah, that's your microphone,
Okay,
yes.
so I'll try to.
All right, that'll help.
I'll speak into that. I'll try. I listened to your testimony at the Tina Peters sentencing.
Yes.
And one of the things that you stated during that testimony is that you've been nominated for a Nobel Prize.
In chemistry, 1990.
Do you know who nominated you?
Yeah, the editor of Metro Distance Shop.
Okay. Do you have a name?
Yeah, just look it up.
And
He
then
came to my lab for a week and took all my biographical information, and I have letters and all kinds of things. The nomination process doesn't mean I'm a Nobel Prize winner. It just means that when some big discovery happens, they go out and investigate. He came to my lab for a week, collected my biographical information, made sure everything I said was real, checked out my experiments, made sure they were real, and then he invited me to write feature articles for his magazine. And he's the head of the Nobel nominating committee.
interesting. My understanding is that they wouldn't release the names of nominees.
No, they don't do that, no.
Was that the one?
Yeah, that was the one.
Yeah, so there you go. Okay, I want to do an alternation, so we're gonna go, and this is, I don't want to be arbitrary or random about this. I have a understanding kind of if people in the room are more on the right side of the aisle or the left side of the aisle, and I do want to go back and forth. So if you'll help me with that, I appreciate that. Marty, I saw your hand go up.
Okay. That way you can see my face.
Like the bride and the groom or something?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, we're not divided in the room, bless you, Commissioner.
Guests of the bride, guests of the groom, and guests of no guests.
All right, so
Anyway.
hopefully we get it all right.
So anyway, Marty Kirk, Bandon, Oregon. It's kind of first I'd like to thank Dr. Grimmer and Dr. Frank for being here, and I like the fact that there was a lively discussion between the two things, and they agreed to disagree on some stuff, and they agreed on other things. That's what discourse and debate is all about.
Right.
I like the fact that you guys had this thing. One thing, it's not really a question, but I'm going to, we were talking about walk lists, and I have all the data from the walk list because I collected all that data. And so essentially we had, out of 174 voters that we checked out, we had 28 plus 28 plus 33 plus 21 plus 6 plus, anyway, we had that many anomalies. We had that many situations where it was like, and the problem is in Oregon, if you send a ballot to somebody's house and they don't live there anymore, it cannot be forwarded. So that means that somebody would have had to live there to take that ballot and vote it. So essentially, I have all that data if you'd like it. It's not really a question, but it's just a statement saying I have all that stuff.
That's what I call littering the pavement.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, I just wanted to make that statement, and thanks so much for both you being here and doing this.
I don't need a microphone, I've always been very projected. My name's Patty Sorensen, I live in Coquille, Oregon. The county will be paying me a small salary soon, as I was hired last month in your elections office. I start in 11 days. I'm excited, but I'm also unsure. Only that I feel strongly about my own integrity and honesty, and I want you and every voter to believe that. And number one, I want to feel safe. I was born in California. I moved here in '04. It's just that simple. The three most important things to me was a driver's license and registration. I'm gonna get excited. My library card and my voter registration. It doesn't matter what party. I've been an election official for over a decade in California. My integrity is unquestionable, and I want to feel safe. And I feel some of the comments written and said, not in this room today, not today. And I loved the lively discourse, and I trust you three men completely. I just want to feel safe.
Thank you, and nobody is questioning your integrity, nor the integrity of any person involved in our local elections, our clerk, her staff, or her volunteers.
I thank you.
Or paid staff, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anybody, Rob?
Rob Taylor from Banzan. I want to thank the commissioners for doing this. I want to thank Professor Grimmer, Dr. Douglas Frank for coming here and speaking. I think when we have more of these issues, and we have them quite a bit, where there's separation, there's division in the community, that we should have these types of discussions. This has been one of the best I've had in a long time, and I think we should follow what he's asked. There's no reason not to get an election board going. It's in Article 8 of your own charter. We need to get that going. You need to do a penetration test. And you also, I think we should get those lists, and I think the county would behoove to get volunteers to go out and knock on doors. And I'd be happy to go with someone on the other side of the aisle, just so we can discover for ourselves, because I have no clue. You can watch a lot of graphs, you can see a lot of statistics, but until you're knocking on that door, you really have no clue. And then we gotta design questions like Grimmer said to do that.
Okay,
Thank you.
I don't think,
I would comment, yeah, that's, the knocking on the doors, the reason why that's so important is because the sort of public dialogue is mistrust of the machines, and so everybody wants to audit the machines, but over and over again, there are very few exceptions to this, the recounts match the machines. I think auditing the machines is the wrong approach. You need to audit the voters. You need to make sure every one of those ballots you counted was from the voter you think it's from. And if you were knocking on doors, Commissioner Taylor, and 7 out of 7 of the first ones you knocked on, the people didn't live there and they don't know who they are, but a ballot was mailed to that residence.
and it was voted.
And how did those people get those ballots then? If you see where I'm going, this is a huge problem that you have. It's why if you were to bring back local control of your rolls and clean your rolls yourselves, like Rob is saying, if you have your local citizens police their own rolls, that's the way we did it for most of our career in this country.
That raises a question that I would pose to Mr. Grimmer, and I'll get to you next, Dee Dee, okay? Is that, how do we, gosh dang it, now my train just left the station. It'll come back. Dee Dee, why don't you come on up and maybe my train will return on the other track.
While Dee Dee comes up, can I just ask a follow-up on this? So, if the allegation is that people are coming in who shouldn't be there or who had already departed Oregon, another way to approach this is public record searches on the individuals who supposedly are phantom voters and locate where they are. The nice thing about that is that it doesn't require people to go knock on the door. Sometimes people are skeptical about who comes to the door. I'm not saying this, but various government officials have had various attitudes towards these sorts of canvases that could lead to some controversy that probably wouldn't be productive. So just figuring out who these people are from public record searches where there's an abundance of data, I think would be an initial, even easier step if that's the case. And my experience has been investigating in those circumstances, we're able to find those people and understand who they are.
Okay. Dee Dee.
Yes. Dee Dee Murphy, Coos Bay, Oregon. And I want to say that we do have local control of our elections. We do all the work in our office, entering all the voter registrations that come to us either by DMV or by electronic registration or by mail registry. It's all done right there in the elections office. And I want to know if you alerted the authorities, the county clerk, the SOS, anybody, about anybody that you found you felt was fraudulently voting.
If you're asking me directly about that, no, I did not do that. What we did was returned the walk list for whatever protocol was going to be pursued on that. So no, I didn't do that.
So did you, Dr. Frank, or do you?
I haven't. What my policy is when I work with a local team, I give them lists. They search the list themselves. They pick out likely suspects. They go knock on the doors. then I don't say, now run to the clerk. I think that's a mistake. I require them to do the public records search. I require them to do their own investigation. You guys are busy. We don't need to overwhelm you with a bunch of cases
Well,
that
at
are not real
least the
cases.
SOS should know, that's what
Well,
we do when we get that information.
What I'm saying is we're in that process right now. I've just established a team here. I never had a team here before. I talked to a couple of people. So what will happen is they'll research it, and when they find legit cases, then they'll bring those legit cases to you. There's no sense overwhelming you with a bunch of red herrings.
And actually, you know what, I'll correct my own response to you, because it occurred to me as I saw the sheriff walking by. As a matter of fact, I did, after that canvassing, didn't I, Sheriff, sit down with you and Sheriff Zanny when you were Captain Fabrizio? We sat down at Frazier's and I talked to you guys about this. And they told me that there wasn't any, they didn't have any jurisdiction, they didn't have any authority to pursue that would have to go through the Secretary of State. So I apologize for misremembering, but I did in fact report it to an authority, so.
Well, I do want to reiterate that we do have local control over our elections. We program our own ballots, we count them ourselves, and they're all right in our county clerk's office, and they're not anywhere else.
Okay. Nancy. David, I'll get you next.
Nancy Brown, Coos Bay. I just want to say I do agree with having our, like an election board or whatever it's going to be called. I agree with that because I think that if we can get both sides or whatever together working on the same thing, then our community will start coming together. Because right now we're so divided and so high strung that nobody wants to listen, nobody wants to do anything, and I think everybody would be better with that working together.
Very good, thank you for that. And I do trust that whether you're an extremely conservative Republican or an extremely progressive Democrat, that you're interested in transparency, honesty, and integrity in our elections. Everybody has to look and see that it was conducted fairly, because the role of the election is to establish in the mind of the vanquished that he was vanquished fairly.
Sure.
And that's one of the things that brings us together and unifies us.
On his way up, can I comment on something?
Yeah, please.
I wanted to say something about Nancy's comment. We're about to have an election.
Yeah.
And all of my reconnaissance around the country says we're going to have a lot of turmoil. We're going to have a lot of arguments. So even if there was nothing wrong in the past with any of your elections, if we stipulated to that, you might still consider having an election board. Why? To be ready for the onslaught that is about to happen. It would be good preparation. What's the worst case? You're ready.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, David, thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is David Jennings. I live here in Coquille. I had a question for both Dr. Frank and Dr. Grimmer. Many people have proposed returning to paper ballots, voting in person, without a machine count, doing a hand count on elections. Could both of you discuss which might be your contrasting views on that in terms of how much would that actually cost? How accurate would it be compared to the present system? What sort of staff would it require in addition to the basic cost? And what kind of time frame would it take to complete a hand count compared to the vote by mail? And then just to add, the vote by mail was adopted by the citizens of Oregon in 1998 on a ballot measure with 69%, actually more than 69% voting yes. And I think if you're going to change to a different system in this state, you're going to have to do it statewide. But anyway, if you could discuss a hand count, give some contrasting views on that, I think that might be useful. I don't know who would want to start first.
I don't have any first, but I can also go.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, so just walk down as I understand Dr. Frank's proposals. Voter identification laws, I suspect we agree there. I've published several papers about voter identification laws. They have minuscule effects on turnout, no effect on the partisan composition of the electorate. So, I can point you to a number of peer-reviewed papers on that.
So you're saying that people of color were able to find ID and get registered to vote.
Well, yeah,
It's
I-
amazing.
So I'll just go with since you asked, I'll just go a little bit more detail on that. It is the case in basically every state in the country that people of color are less likely to hold identification. It's just the case that individuals who lack identification are also very unlikely to turn out to vote anyways, because you need identification to do most of everything in life. If you don't have identification, you're probably not finding your way to the polling place. And so we use a variety of statistical techniques to estimate that causal effect. We get very close to zero. On hand counting, it's come up a couple times. I'll bring it up again. There's a contrast to European elections, which does do hand counting. They have a simpler ballot, and because they have a simpler ballot, they have less variation in the ballot types occurring. It makes it easier to do that hand counting. Just thinking about this, and Dr. Frank had brought up Shasta. I just brought up some of the estimates from Shasta County at the time. Kathy Darling Allen produced these. Some of these I think we'll agree on. Some of these estimates we might disagree on. I just want to offer these as sort of point of information. In Shasta, there's many different ballot types and contests, and in the most recent presidential election, they counted 2.8 million ovals. And so when you think about, just like the number of votes that are cast, so you're counting each one of those ovals as one vote that's counted. So that's complicated. Shasta's determination was that it was going to be much more costly to do the hand counting, at least from Kathy Darling Allen. The reason for this is because California law was going to require the people to do the hand counting to actually be employees, and that's going to lead to about 1.6 million. Along the way, Shasta also approved some machinery in order to do the hand counting, and that cost about $950,000. They're actually not doing hand counting now. AB, I think it's 969 in California, says you have to be, only counties under 1,000 individuals can do the hand counting.
Modoc.
Yeah, it's one, exactly, it's one like rural place is able to do it. So that's not happening in Shasta, so they're not gonna switch to hand counting there. So when we think about the cost, the cost could be high. It's going to interact with how Oregon would regulate that hand counting. It's also the case that there is some peer-reviewed evidence that shows that hand counting is going to induce more errors than with a machine count. They're able to do this off of a variety of audits that have occurred over time and making comparisons across those. That doesn't mean that if you implemented a hand counting system, there would be more errors, but you just think about what's the tolerable amount of mistakes to be made. To reduce that, you're gonna have to have more people or more focus in order to get that error down lower and lower. And you would just like to know you're not gonna induce more errors with the hand counting. When it comes to timeliness, that obviously you can think about the time it would take to count ballots is gonna be a trade-off between, sorry, am I going too long?
No, you're fine.
Okay. It's a trade-off between how much money you want to spend to set up a system. You can imagine having a big system, lots of redundancy, many people in the room, and try to do this very quickly. That's obviously going to be very expensive and require lots of coordination, to a more threadbare system of hand counting that could go slower in order to make sure that you have the appropriate checks in place, but not spending a lot of money on the staff. So it would be very difficult. The devil's in the details and how that hand counting is being implemented. And I think that's by and large why many localities have switched to different versions of machines in order to count their ballots.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
You want me to answer that? Yes.
Yes.
So
please do.
I agree, Professor Grimmer, that it's not an apples to apples comparison to say, well, Europe does it in a day, so we should be able to do it in a day. I agree. The ballot is simpler there, and so that's an issue. So we've explored this, and we've done tests all over the country. And I was trying to bring one up, but I'm not online anymore. But we call it the Cajun clothesline. And we spent $49 at a hardware store buying a couple of 2x4s and a pulley and a clothesline. And we were able to count a 1,000 ballot precinct with 6 volunteers in 2.5 hours. And it was a 14-issue ballot, typically a typical complicated ballot. So it's very feasible to do in a short amount of time on election night. The point is, you don't do it centrally. You do it in the precinct level.
Right.
And that's what makes it feasible, and that's why for 200 years it was feasible in America. But the one other point I would make is that, and by the way, that was when we ran our analysis, not Kathy Darling's analysis, who's no longer the clerk, by the way, in Shasta County. She's been replaced by the commissioners. When we did our analysis, we calculated that they would save $250,000 if they went to a hand count. They were saving money, not costing them money. And so I agree, he and I will probably disagree on some of that, and that's fine. This is why we're having a healthy discussion about it. But the key point to me here, the key principle, is even if it costs more, if your people trust it, and you can recount it as many times as you need to, integrity and trust matter more than cost. So even if it did cost more, but I don't think it costs more, I still think that's the better way to go, because right now, all the polling, all the Rasmussen polls and things like that show that a majority of our people in America no longer trust our elections. That, to me, is a bigger problem. Your people, I hear it all the time, people say, oh, we don't want to vote, the whole thing's rigged. Well, you're losing participation in our great experiment. You know, America is an experiment in self-government, and we're losing that. So anyway, you never sacrifice integrity and trust for cost.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
All right, Sherry, I know your hand was up, but I've got it to keep the back and forth going. Roger was ahead of you, and then Abigail is number 2, and so you'll be number 3. Okay, Sherry. All right, Roger.
Hi, Roger Shipman. I live in Aurora, Oregon, but I'm the chair of the Constitution Party of Oregon, so I have constituents here in Coos County. I don't expect these two gentlemen ever to agree on everything, but I would like to know, and I told him earlier, I was here in July for the meeting then, and I afterwards had some doubts expressed to me about what Dr. Frank said, and I looked up and read Dr. Grimmer's paper, and sure enough found that some of it seemed to make a lot of sense until I compared year over year. And then I found everything Dr. Frank said within 10 minutes and went, oh, that's how you do it. And so what I'd like to know is, because they both said, oh, well, you're talking about a straw man, what would the two of you do, especially you, what would you do to work together to eliminate that straw man bias so that accusation doesn't come up anymore? And you can, okay, now at least we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive into this, and it could be productive. The prediction that Dr. Frank is making, makes a prediction about the turnout rate and then multiplies it by the number of people in each age group. So fundamentally, the way that those two things would be aligned.
That's not right.
How do you come up with the predicted number of people in
That's
each group?
not what I do.
What do you do?
I take the ratio between who's registered and who voted, and that produces a ratio by age. And then I multiply by that who's registered in every county. And that's different than a rate of turnout.
Can I just respond to that? Yeah. Of course. So what you just described is the registration turnout rate. So you take the number of people who are registered and the number of people who voted. I'm going to create a ratio.
Yeah.
That's the turnout rate of registered. That's exactly what I produced on my slides. And then you said you're going to multiply by the number of people in that group. That's exactly what I have on my slides. It's exactly the same.
Well, how come we don't get the same numbers, me?
I do. I get the correlation of 0.99, but that's because the correlation of counts leads to this misleading conclusion that you're doing perfect prediction. If you are making a prediction about the rate, that's the thing you're saying is going to be the same.
Nope, I'm predicting the number of people.
Well, let me just be clear. The only way you could be accurately predicting the number is if you got the rate correct. Because the number you are supplying to your calculation based upon information in the voter file. So it is the rate that you're calculating that you're saying is the same everywhere. And you're saying,
I'm calculating the number.
Just finish.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
So you're saying in the state, there is a key. That key is about rates, is it not?
It's about relative rates. In other words, if you know how many 18-year-olds vote in a county and you know how many 50-year-olds vote in a county, that relative rate of the two is the same. A simple way to do it, a common parlance way of saying that, is the shape is the same in every county. Not the rate, the shape. And the shape is it's like, let me make a simple analogy. Let's say you have a picture of grandma, and it's a 4x6 picture, and you have a picture of grandma, and it's an 8x10 picture. When you look at those two, you go, oh yeah, that's grandma. But they're different sizes. But the reason you recognize that they're the same is because the ratio between her eyes and her nose and her ears and the features on that picture are the same as the ratios on this picture. It's the relative arrangement of her features that you recognize, not the absolute arrangement of them. And so it's the relative rate that's the same in every county. It's the same shape in every county. And the fact that that exists is what I'm saying is highly suspicious. Because what you're essentially implying is that that everybody in every county votes exactly in the same relative rates. It doesn't matter how many 50-year-olds and 18-year-olds you have, it's always the same relative proportion.
So I would just say
That's different.
It is not. It is exactly what I put up there. If it's the same rates or relative rates, you'll have that same shape, and you're making a prediction about the rates and the relative rates. If that were true, you would see the rates of voting in each county align along that line, but you do not. There is substantial cross-county variation in age groups.
So I can put up my graphs again.
On the rate at which people vote. There's substantial variation. I'm saying that when you multiply that by the count, you get deceived into thinking of this high correlation. That is the result of the algorithm thinking that it's predicting well because there's variation in the number of people in each group. At the rates, that is not true. And the rates is the
So I don't care about the rates, I care that I can predict the numbers. That's my point. And I'm not trying to say that I'm making some world-class prediction. I'm saying it's the same in every county. That's suspicious. And that shows that it's centrally controlled, because that doesn't, when I use those same numbers and I go to a different state, all I have to do is look at one county there and I can predict that whole state. I go to a different state and I only look at one county there and I can predict that whole state. But they don't work in between the states. That's the point.
Just really quick on this. The absolute, if that was true, the mean absolute percentage error would work as a prediction, and it doesn't. And it's also the case the keys are very clearly not unique.
So go to me, you're right, they're not unique, they change every state. So what you can do is you can go to my Rumble channel and you can see that I've put all the states up there and I can predict them all, okay? So there you go.
You can go to electioninsights.org and I show that this pattern happens in every county.
Okay.
You are definitely making a prediction.
All right, Abigail.
Can I just say that's not the question I asked?
You can say that, but we're not gonna keep going on that one.
No, that's the whole point.
Okay, that last exchange left my brain so scrambled, I'm not sure I could.
I was hoping you would still remember your question.
No, Darren, here, my name's Abigail Bach, I live in Coos Bay. My question goes to this talk of hacking. I'm curious what machines are actually being hacked, because here's the procedure that I've observed and participated in. The machines that tally the votes, and they are paper ballots, right? And we keep the paper ballots, so we have a paper ballot system here. The machines that tally those ballots are air-gapped. They're not connected to the internet in any way. And what happens is the machines produce a numeric result, and that is put on a flash drive, a brand new flash drive that's, blank. And it's taken over to a machine that is connected to the internet. And that's how the results from Coos County get reported to the state. But we still have those results. The numbers, we know what the results are, and the numbers that are reported by the Secretary of State have to be the same. So I don't understand where this state control hacking allegation is relevant.
I assume that's a question to me.
The question, I believe, is to you, Dr.
I believe.
Yeah.
So in the Washington County case, the Tim Sipple case, where the state filed a restraining order restricting his ability to share the information that the clerk accidentally gave him, the state admits that if that information became public, that it would make the systems vulnerable because they could be hacked wirelessly. Now, how could they be attacked wirelessly if they didn't have the ability to connect? So during the case, this question came up. So you can go read the transcript of the case and you can see the answer to this. The lovely lady, she's like a 75-year-old Japanese lady, sweet little lady, very charming. She was embarrassed that she made this mistake and actually gave an entire copy of the election management system to this citizen, okay? She was embarrassed by that, so she was feeling very defensive. And she sat there in the witness chair. she said this. She's kind of embarrassed, and she says, I understand my electronic systems. She says, I understand these things. I'm even training my replacement. She says, and I can turn the modems on myself without a password, okay? She said that in the witness stand, and those are the machines that are behind the air gap. So she admitted right in the witness stand that the machines had modems in them. Now, the fact that the tabulators, because you asked which machines, those are the tabulators, the ECA, the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission, the federal agency that regulates how our elections can be run in the country, has specifically stated that if your machine has the ability to connect to the internet, it may not be used in federal elections. And your machines are demonstrably that way. I even have the files right on my computer that'll show you the modems in those machines that are not supposed to be used, but we even have the logs showing that they are being used during the election. So when you say which machines, I'm telling you the tabulators, and I'm telling you they're clear ballot, just like your clear ballot. You have the same systems here as they have in Washington County. And so this whole idea of air gap is not a good system.
What about the hand count? The hand count audit that we do? How do you fake that?
Not right now, not right now. You have to wait your turn.
Yeah. I always tell people it doesn't matter how many times you count the cash in the register. What matters is how many of the bills are counterfeit. So she's made the mistake that a lot of people make. They assume that the hacking is for the purpose of flipping ballots in the elections. No, I made that point clear during my presentation. The purpose of hacking is so that you know what the tally is in real time, and you know who's voted in real time. Then you know how many ballots you need to stuff and who you need to stuff them for. And that allows you to put in non-real ballots into the election, and you can count those standing on your head. It doesn't matter how many times you count them.
So you can instantaneously print all these ballots and submit them somehow, and they're not going to be picked up at the after the the election hour closes. They're not going to be picked up from the drop boxes.
I tell people I can
we had several ballots in the mail that weren't postmarked in the last election.
And we'll call that your follow-up.
I tell people I can hack Ohio's elections from my basement. All you need is a good printer, and all I need is a few meals to deliver the ballots to the drop boxes around the state. So that's the problem with it being centrally controlled and electronically interfaced.
Okay. Next up was Sherry, and then Darius, if you wanna go after Sherry, you can. Sherry. DD's front left. Okay. All right.
I'm Sherry Kawecki, and I live in Coos Bay. And I would like to know how else you can explain there's not an anomaly if 100% or more than 100% of the people are voting. And I haven't, I didn't see how you addressed that.
Is that to Mr. Grimmer?
Yes. And there's just a lot of motivation to control elections in countries and in towns. And it seems very likely that there would be an incentive to create these voting machines and then sell them to every single place in the whole country. And it's profitable, and there's a lot of motivation there. So I think it's good that we're having this discussion, and we need to protect our elections and really ask a lot of hard questions about what's going on.
So I just want to be sure that I understand the evidence Dr. Frank presented. I don't believe Dr. Frank presented evidence of, sometimes you hear allegations of precincts where there's more than 100%. I did not hear him present that.
That's correct.
I'm happy to talk about some instances how that can come up and it's actually not an example of voter fraud. The best example of this is the state of Wyoming. Wyoming has election day registration, which exempts it from a lot of the HAVA requirements on maintenance of its list. And in Wyoming, you miss an election, you're off the list, okay? And so the number of registered voters that Wyoming will have on election day is many fewer than the number of ballots that will be cast, because if you skip a federal election, like a midterm election, those people then have to register to vote, and they reappear. So Wyoming will regularly publicize state level voting rates above 100% for that reason. There recently was a similar claim circulating about Henrico County in Virginia, and we're actively looking into that. But the evidence that we have at the moment is what went on there. Without belaboring it, there were in-person votes that were calculated at the precinct level, and then in 2020 they rolled those ballots up at the congressional district if they were absentee. And so the question then is, how do you assign those absentee to precincts? When we go into the voter file data and the voter history data, we are not finding evidence of more than 100% of individuals casting a vote. Going back to the 2020 election, there were some allegations of this happening in places in Michigan. That largely was the result, it looks like, of an analyst making an incorrect merge. They accidentally used data from Minnesota to describe places in Michigan. And so that doesn't look like there was over 100% voting there. And so, so I hope that addresses your question.
I think maybe she misheard me too. I didn't say in Oregon that you have more people voting than you have people in the rolls. You know, if you think about it, Ryan Key is a percentage, it's lower than the rolls. But I did say that you have more people registered than you have people in some of your counties, and that's what's about to come out in the Judicial Watch lawsuit. You have more people, voting is not registration, those are two separate things. You have more people registered than you have people, okay, but not more people voting than you have people.
And I just want to, because this might be an area of slight overlap between us. So unfortunately on the left, basic list maintenance has gotten labeled as a voter purge, and it's sort of a dirty word. But list maintenance is just a regular, normal thing that localities engage in. And so I think you can end up with what in the literature we call deadwood, individuals who are on the voter file who have moved, and so that is the case, that those people exist, that's well known. And in so much as states can engage in reasonable amount of list maintenance, then you'll have fewer of these individuals who no longer reside in a place registered. I don't see a lot of fraud coming from those individuals, but just a part of having a reasonable voter file is about removing those individuals.
Okay, all right, very good, thank you, Sherry. Darius, did you want to, okay, very good.
And this, she was well before Darius.
Okay.
You also have a hand up online.
I see you, ma'am, and then we'll get online right after this lady in the back. Okay, Darius.
Hello, my name is Darius Boudelier. I'm the IT director for Coos County. I apologize for my outburst, but I explained this in the July 2nd meeting, and Dr. Frank repeated it again, that he can easily hack our network from his basement in Ohio. I want to go over this one more time for the record. It's the same, pretty much the same thing I said before. Abigail was 100% correct, although she left a little bit out that's important. Our election system is air-gapped, meaning it is not connected to the county's network, it's not connected to the internet. Our machines, I can't speak for Washington County, and I can't speak for the state of Oregon, our machines do not have modems or wireless connection. They only are connected by cables to each other. There are tabulators and there's a server. The tabulators push their numbers up to the servers. The clerk takes the numbers from the servers, puts them on a brand new, never been used USB flash drive. This is the part Abigail didn't have. They go over to a computer that connects to the state's computers using a encrypted virtual machine that's running in the state. So the transmission of those numbers go up from that thumb drive to a machine running at the state in an encrypted fashion. Encrypted means it's scrambled, it can't be read on the internet. So the only time those numbers go up, they're encrypted and scrambled. Now, those numbers, let's, for the sake of argument, say that there was 10,000 votes for the Democratic candidate and 10,000 votes for the Republican candidate. When the clerk reports those, and if those numbers are different than what's reported, the clerk will call that out. So we know if something happened at the state level, that the numbers don't match what we're counting here. Now, you can maybe hack the state system, but I can tell you there is never a chance where anybody outside of the clerk's office can connect to one of those tabulation machines or the tabulation server. I've said it once, I've said it in more detail this time. This is what's going on. I cannot speak to what you saw at Washington County, but that's not Coos County. And I don't know what's going on at the state of Oregon. I have no overview. Our system, it was designed well, and I reviewed it before it went into place.
Okay.
And I keep an eye on it.
Great. Thank you, Darius.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am? And then we'll get Sam Frost online next, and then Diane after that.
Hi, I'm Cindy Rawlings. I live in Coos County, Coos Bay. I'm new to coming to this meeting. Were our tax dollars used to pay for our guest speakers today?
There's no payment.
Okay. You
I'm
guys-
here at my own expense.
Okay, great, thank you. And I just wanted to give one more voter explanation. I have an active duty Air Force son, and to my knowledge, no matter where they're stationed as they move around the country, because he's almost on 20 years now, they still vote from their Oregon address that existed 20 years ago.
That's true.
So that is an explanation for some of these people that might be in the wind. My feeling today about this meeting about and calling election integrity into question, I feel like the commissioners are being using this platform in servitude to the Trump campaign and the continuing big lie of the stolen election in 2020, and also he continues to propagate the information that we're going to have a stolen election in 2024 and calling for violence. So I feel like giving this air is still playing into this Trump game.
All right, thank you very
I
much.
have another question.
I'm
just
sorry, ma'am, your
for
time
Mr.
your
Frank.
time is up.
Okay.
That was your alarm there. So
I'm curious about his participation with Tina Peters in Colorado.
okay, thank
and
you
her
very much for
conviction.
your question. I appreciate that. All right, Diane, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I forgot that there was someone else behind you who had preceded you, but I will get to you. Okay, yes, please come on up, ma'am. And then Sam Frost will be next. Online.
Thank you. Karen Crouch, Lakeside. The question I have is for Dr. Kramer. You were talking about the DMV incident, and you mentioned approximately 1,500 people got ballots that they shouldn't have got ballots. Do you know how many of those actually voted?
So I actually don't know if they even got ballots. So I know that they were registered and then were non-citizens. So I'm not sure how many have received ballots. And I also don't know how many have voted. I don't have that number in front of me.
Okay, but it could be safe to say 1,500 divided by 300,000. Was that the approximate number of the registrants, of the DMV registrants?
It's a little bit apples to oranges. That 300,000 number, I was using a report from the Secretary of State in Oregon that was published at the end of 2016, where they described the first year of the system. And so that system persists. There's going to be more people who were enrolled over the course of the system. And I would just add one other bit to this. That system also helps when someone moves from county to county or within the county to get that address updated so that the ballot gets to the right place.
My point is that the percentage is so low, it could not make any difference in any of these elections. It was like 0.5%.
Yeah, so I would say that's my personal view, but when we start to characterize a percentage as low, that's we're loading a value judgment on it, and so different people could have different views about how they feel about number of registered voters versus non-citizens. I'm personally interested in getting those people who are eligible registered, but someone could say, well, I actually am more concerned about that error. And I think the solution is to design a system where that error doesn't happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Which now that they've called it out, I think they're going to be much more careful, at least one can hope so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, can you bring up Sam Frost, please? We have a questioner online.
Hi, I'm Samantha Frost, and I had a question for Professor Grimmer. Well, I have a couple questions, but did Professor Grimmer use the same year of election for his data when comparing with Dr. Frank's? That was one of my questions, because I know that Dr. Frank uses, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but he does use the rates basically from the census, so the age groups from the census. And I'm wondering, because to be honest, I think that Professor Grimmer actually proved Dr. Frank's point in the graph that he used, because all of the dots actually aligned with Dr. Frank's line. So, but you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. The next question that I wanted to pose was to Dr. Frank. I know that you have the quote from our Attorney General. I would love for you to quote that. The statement, it was a statement made about the Wi-Fi.
All right,
So
there you go. Dr. Grimmer?
So I believe we're using very similar data. I would have to know the exact snapshot Dr. Frank used. We're using the most proximate snapshot we could get at it. It would be from either late 2020 or very early 2021. And I just want to emphasize, what I'm demonstrating is not proving Dr. Frank's point. If Dr. Frank were correct, when I use the mean absolute percentage error, which is not about the absolute turnout rates, it's about assessing that error, his estimate would be 0 or very close to 0. It is not. There is substantial error even when you apply that to the counts. So the issue is that it is just simply not true that individuals in different age groups are voting the same way in the state of Oregon. It is a artifact, a mechanical artifact of using a correlation with counts that happens. In the article that I cited, we proved this mathematically. We show it with simulations. It is simply just not the case that every age group in counties in Oregon are voting the same way. And that's what the plot with the blue dots all around the red line shows. Just demonstrates there could be no one prediction that could possibly predict every county because there's so much variation.
But somehow I did.
Because you used a correlation that artificially inflates it. It is because you used the wrong statistical test. The correlation is not the appropriate metric.
It doesn't matter how I did it. The fact is I did. So they're all centrally controlled is my point. Okay. All right. Now she wanted me to read the quote. Should I do that? This is a quote from your own Secretary of State. It's in writing. It's in the restraining order. It says, quote, even when systems are not directly connected to networks, as your clerk pointed out, they are vulnerable to attack through physical or wireless access. That's the mistake your clerk is making, and I'm calling it out. It's a mistake. He thinks because he's not connected to the local Wi-Fi and not connected to the local network, that makes him safe. He's wrong. I can call his modems. This is not connected to the local network. This is not connected to the local Wi-Fi. Guess what? You can call me from anywhere in the world on this, and I can call your machines from anywhere in the world on your machines because it's not the local network. He's misunderstanding. And this is your own Attorney General admitting this. Even when systems are not directly connected to works, they are vulnerable to attack through physical wireless access. And they even say, oh no, they're air-gapped. This is air-gapped. They're missing the whole point.
It's not, it's connected.
This seems to be, so in other words, and this is their comment. This is not my comment. This is your own Attorney General talking about the machines you're actually using. Further, such a disclosure creates risks to elections infrastructure to any jurisdiction using this system. That's their words, not mine.
Okay, very good. Let's see. Oh, Diane, sorry. I knew I was on something.
6 feet tall, they can't see.
Yeah. Too tall to
Anyway,
see.
so I have an idea. You say you can hack it, why don't you?
That's what I just proposed, a penetration
Let's
test.
hack it. Let's prove that we can do it. Let's prove you're wrong.
All right, okay.
I proposed it.
8% variance. 8% is your adjudication rate.
Can we get a pool on this? I'm in for 100.
Yeah, but who's gonna bet against that?
Sorry, so I mean, we could obviously debate 8%. It's not a perfect prediction. And I would just suggest, if you wanted to engage in the hacking, I would just strongly recommend working with Secretary of State's office and law enforcement officials. There's a variety of laws that could be broken when you do that, even with good intentions. And we just really hate for someone to get this idea, want to try it out, try to do something, and they end up in a not favorable position. So I just felt obligated to say that.
I'll make a comment about that. been doing this around the country now for several years, and I sat down with secretaries of states with their permission and hacked into their entire state elections. And it's not, and everything we do is legal. Nothing I do is illegal, because that's the last thing I need, just to go to jail. Everything we do is legal. And if you want to look it up, look up, I think it's July of 2021, Lake County, Ohio. We arranged it, that one became public. I don't talk about the ones that are still private. For example, if you guys order a pen test and we are successful, we're not going to announce it to the public. That's up to you to do that. But Lake County deliberately made it public because they didn't want to use the machines anymore. And so they were proving to the state and to Frank LaRose, the Secretary of State, that their machines were not secure. They actually called me, I set it up. I used a federally licensed white hat hacker. He broke into the system and demonstrated the whole thing was totally online, even though the local clerks didn't know it was online. And we showed that it was completely hackable. So that was a penetration test, it's called. And that's perfectly legal. Banks do it all the time. Military does it all the time. Governments do it all the time to test whether they're secure or not. That's a normal procedure. I agree with Grimmer. Anything you do, make sure it passes your own DA's, make sure you're not doing anything illegal. It's perfectly legal. Somebody asked me about the Tina Peters thing, and that's relevant to this. And that is that she, like your clerk, swore up and down, our machines cannot go online. Well, we did what's called a forensic image. And so we did forensic imaging of all her machines. That means we backed up every bit and byte off the machines, the deleted files, the BIOS, everything. And in those forensic images, you can see the logs showing that those machines were going online, calling out, phone home through the cell phone modems, and there are 36 of those modems that she was completely unaware of it. So am I accusing your clerk of lying? No. I'm saying he doesn't know because he didn't take the back cover off and look for the modems himself. And why can't he do that? Because there's a sticker on there, and if he breaks the sticker, it's decertified. So not only a penetration test, you could also do forensic images, and you have to break the seals that way.
Okay, so point of clarification, Darius is actually our IT director, not our clerk.
I'm sorry.
But Darius, I'd like you to address, please, that question of the sticker on the back of the machine that keeps you from opening it to see if there's a modem in there.
Yes, that sticker is there. And I'd like to add that I saw the order for those machines. There were no modems in those machines.
In the order.
And my office processed those machines, so I know that what we ordered is what we got. Have you seen those machines? Dr. Frank, have you seen those machines?
I would love to go
Have you seen modems in those machines? So how do you know I have machines in my modems in my computers?
Because your own Attorney General said so.
She's not seen my machines either.
Well, so
it's one thing to say they could be there, but to stand up in front of a room of people and say they are there is reckless and irresponsible. You're putting ideas into the people's heads that are here and listening to this meeting that things are not necessarily the way they are.
So get a cybersecurity examination, get a pen test, and then you can prove to everybody that it's real.
We have had a pen test, and they didn't find anything because those machines were air-gapped. And your phone is not air-gapped because it's connected to your cellular service. It is connected to the internet. My machines in the elections office are not. They are air-gapped, and that's why nothing from the elections office showed up in the penetration test. You did not ask if we'd had a penetration test. You kept telling me to get one, didn't you? Again, reckless and irresponsible. Don't make assumptions without asking questions.
So Darius, you're saying that you have conducted a penetration test.
CISA performed a penetration test.
Okay.
We gave them all of our networks and told them, have at it, do whatever you can.
Okay.
Yep. And I also have weekly tests done on the machines that are facing the internet. And they send me back if they found anything new. If they find anything, we mitigate it immediately.
So I have a way to kind of address this.
Yeah.
So you have the clear ballot system. That means you have the laptop computer attached to the tabulator, right?
Okay.
Is that an off-the-shelf laptop?
Is it an off-the-shelf laptop? We ordered Dell machines, yes.
Have I made that point?
No. What's your point?
Every Dell laptop has a modem in it.
That's not true. You're an idiot.
I'm sorry.
All right.
That is not
Fearless. Come on now.
every telephone machine. They haven't done modems for 10 years. You have to specifically order a modem. to have a
All right.
modem.
I can't resolve that question here. So, yeah, I don't even know what to.
I
what to do.
apologize, but
Yeah,
these
you need to.
just not factually true.
All right. I think we've had enough of this. We're 30 minutes over our allotted time. I wanted to give everyone who wanted to speak an opportunity to speak, and I'm going to definitely think and consult about how to resolve this final question that arose. Here today. And that is the connectivity of the tabulation machines to the internet, because I'm not fully satisfied, and I'd like to be. So if they're not, then great. If they are, we ought to know. And I certainly have found both Darius and Dr. Frank to be of the utmost integrity, and let's keep all the peace we can there. Other commissioners, any final comments before we adjourn?
Other than to thank everyone in the room, all of our citizens, and particularly our presenters. Thank you both very, very much. And with Dr. Grimmer, 2 of his students, Joe and Casey, thank you for being here as well. This was a great, very interesting morning, and I appreciate everyone staying in control, almost. and that's fine, and I appreciate Darius's conviction of what's in his machines and what's not in his machines. And anyway, just thank you to everyone.
Commissioner Maine?
My comment about House Bill 2208 and being able to have ballots counted 7 days after the election, at roughly 11:29 this morning, I emailed the county clerk and asked, when ballots are delivered by mail after the close of election, are those ballots tracked by name and how that elector voted? I haven't got an answer yet. I look forward to an answer.
Okay.
Be interesting.
Who sponsored the bill, Bob?
This current one,
Yeah.
2208, was Senator Brock Smith. However, that portion of that bill was already in there. They made other modifications for 2208, which passed, but it was in there in previous bills. I don't fault him for not reading it all. I read through it word for word and went, oh, look at this, by discovering it. But, stuff comes at them with 10,000 miles an hour sometimes, and staff, and they don't always read everything. I know that because stuff gets through the Oregon legislature without people fully vetting what's going on. We all electors don't do that either, like Measure 110, which opened up the drugs for every whatever in the whole country to come here and do them without being arrested. And that's why, that's why we have the major homeless problem.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. And everybody was pretty well behaved today. Thank you all for maintaining the decorum. Give these 2 gentlemen a hand, please. Thank you very much. And we are adjourned.